disgrace. In pain the sages cry, as Uriah's words ring true and echo through the night. Woe unto the Jews, Akivado, you see, we're faced with tragedy, but still it seems that you deny with laughter and with glee. No, my son, he's answering, half the promise now fulfilled, and soon he will rebuild, only stronger, and the city streets will fill, and once more will children play, as prophecies unravel, and tomorrow starts today. So take comfort in these words, let the tears dry from your eyes, for one day we'll see our Mikvah. One day these walls will rise, and the city streets will fill. When the old remain forever young, and the tyrant's word shine as the sun, and the lion lays in peace aside the lamb. He'll bring us home on eagle's wings, as once again live and sing, to a nation now rejoin, only stronger, and the city streets will fill, and once more will children play, as prophecies unravel, and tomorrow starts today. So take comfort in these words, let the tears dry from your eyes, for one day we'll see our Mikvah. One day these walls will rise, and the city streets will rise. Higher Yamalu, Yeladim v'yeladas misachakim. Urachayvais, higher Yamalu, Yeladim v'yeladas misachakim, and the city streets will fill, and once more will children play, as prophecy.
Hi, and good morning, everyone. I'm Shira Pomerantz, Director of Project Sarah, a New Jersey statewide program servicing those affected by domestic violence and sexual abuse in the Jewish community. On behalf of the entire Project Sarah team, I'd like to welcome you to our annual event for Kallah teachers and Mikvah attendants. We are so lucky to have Kallah teachers and Mikvah attendants join us from different parts of New Jersey, as well as many other locations across the globe, including Mexico, Israel, and Brazil. It's really great to see some familiar faces here. Welcome. I'd like to say a special thank you to some of our Project Sarah staff for providing us with the technical support needed to make this event possible. We will be checking the chat box for comments and questions. Please keep in mind that we may not be able to address every comment due to our limited time, but you can always reach out to us after the event. Our email address is hereforyou@projectsarah.org, and other contact information will be put in the chat as well. You can also hold your questions, because at the end of the presentation, the third hour will be a Q&A panel with both speakers. As reflected in the title of today's workshop, Holding Your Hands, we look to you as partners in this critical work. As you know, that individuals, and as we know, that individuals within the community will likely come to you as the first line of contact if they are struggling with high conflict in their relationship. It is so important that we inform and remind everyone here that Project Sarah serves as a vital resource in our community. We hope that the video presentation, which was shown at the start of this event, was informative and a helpful reminder of these services. You all are in a unique position of being able to share information about these services, whether in a confidential conversation or by posting information about these resources. Please be in touch with us if you'd like to place contact cards in your mikvahs or Project Sarah posters anywhere else, such as bulletin boards or bathroom stalls. It's important that we get the message out there. That support is available to those community members in need. Just last week, I had a familiar conversation with a community member who is a survivor of abuse. She explained her circumstances, the difficulty she faced in connecting with resources, and how she had to borrow thousands of dollars to attain assistance that she didn't realize Project Sarah provides for free. When she heard that we can help her with therapy for herself and her children, psychiatric care, and legal services, she was both surprised and more hopeful that she will be able to cope and heal without adding more financial stress to her worries. As is commonly said, it takes a village to do this work. We rely on individuals like all of you here today to help spread the awareness of these issues and the resources available. Now, I am honored to introduce to you our first speaker this morning, Aliza Bulau. I had the privilege of hearing Aliza speak earlier this year, and immediately after thought, wouldn't it be great if she would speak at Project Sarah at our Kallah teacher and Mikvah attendance event this year? Since it was very clear that she has so much to offer. So I'm really happy that you were able to, and you made the time to be with us here today, Aliza. Aliza is an author, educator, and mentor to Jewish communal leaders around the world, and is the founding director of CORE, an organization that connects Jewish women and strengthens Jewish homes and communities. We are delighted to have you here with us today. Aliza Bulau.
Thank you so much, Shira. I'm thrilled to be here today. And I so appreciated seeing that initial video. It was very expanding for me, just to understand everything that Project Sarah does. And I hope we'll get to learn more about it. My presentation today is really about Mikvah, and not necessarily just about Taharat Mishpacha Mikvah. I really want to talk about Mikvah and what it is. And unfortunately, I think because here we are in the 9 days, so just thinking about the Churban and what it means for us, one of the things that it means for us is not just that we don't have a Beit HaMikdash anymore, but we don't even know what that means. And we don't have that much of a connection with the Tuma and Tara cycles of every aspect of Jewish life that was so integral at that time. Today, it's been narrowed down. There's only 3 reasons that we use a mikveh today with a bracha, 3 halachic reasons for the end of nida, for conversion, and for dishes. Everything else, which means all male mikveh dips, are optional and not halachic. And women also go occasionally for other things like Erev Yom Kippur or Erev other Yom Tovs. But I really want to talk about what mikveh is in its larger expanded sense, so that we, as mikveh attendants, we as women who hold this, can help invite women into something completely different than maybe what we thought before. So it's often seen as a stop right now in between nida and tahara, tuma and tahara. It is a transition point from tuma to tahara. But let's think about where we're going with this and what it could be and what our role is. So I want to start first with a core concept, lowercase c and uppercase c, both uppercase c for the organization that I run, lowercase c because at its core to Judaism. But really, what is the role of the feminine altogether? And I have a sentence for it, which we won't go into deeply, but you'll understand what I mean. What is our role? It's to create space in which others flourish. And if we think about that, so that's the womb. It creates a space in which another flourishes. a dynamic space. It's not absenting from the space so that they can grow, but it's a dynamic space in which another can flourish. Like a well-run home, like a beautiful Shabbos table. So much work goes into creating that space, but we ourselves don't fill that space. We lean back then and let other people flourish in that space. Just like Hashem did for us when Hashem made the space for this world to exist. Right? Hashem really scooched Hashem's self back. That's the concept of tzimtzum, to create space in which we could flourish. We human beings created space physically, whatever that means, for this world to exist inside Hashem. Hashem is the space in which we exist. And so we sort of exist inside the womb of Hashem in a way. And then also Hashem scooched Hashem's will out of the way. His ratzon is moved out of the way so that our ratzon can exist, so that we can function. It's the only way that we could do something contrary to Hashem's will, which we can, unfortunately. And fortunately, because Hashem gave us ratzon. He gave us ratzon, he gave us bechira, that we could do things that aren't necessarily in alignment with him, which means that when we choose to do something in alignment, we get extra connection with that because we've made those choices. So that being said, then what do we do as mikvah attendants to create the space in which another can flourish? How do we do that? How do we understand our role there as facilitators of an experience? So I want to talk about just the layers of that facilitation and then give you something deeper inside of that. So we're first of all facilitating a physical experience. How do you come into the mikvah, go into the water, come out, go home the way that you want to be, right? It's a physical experience. And for that, we want to make sure that the laundry is clean and the room is tidy and that we greet with a smile and et cetera, et cetera. This is a physical experience that we are facilitating. Then there's a halachic experience that we're facilitating. We should be knowledgeable enough to know when there's a shaila and how to ask one and who we can call right on the moment if we need to, because we are facilitating a halachic process and we have to be aware enough to be able to facilitate that. Then there's an emotional process. What is it when somebody comes in? What if there is high conflict at home? Where are they going? It might be scary. Where have they come from? It might be triggering. So there's an emotional process that we're facilitating, even if we're not talking about it, if we're not therapists in the moment, still, we're facilitating an emotional process, hopefully usually a healthy one and sometimes a fraught one. And it's good for us to be aware of what are some flags for a fraught process or a healthy process that we're facilitating, but to be aware that we are facilitating an emotional process as well. Then there's an aesthetic process that's connected to the physical, but there is an aesthetic process that we are facilitating. How does one prepare themselves through the aesthetic process, through the actual touching of the water, the being in the space, the relating to the human being that's there? How does the aesthetic process facilitate the aesthetic process that they're going home to participate in? And then there's a spiritual process. What is that? And we're going to go deeper into the spiritual process here because it's so much more than the nida experience. Okay. In speaking about that, let's talk about where we first see mikvah and where we first see water. So here's your trick question for the day. On which day of creation was water created? Just think inside your mind, which day was it? I know you're calculating. It was created before creation. I'm going to read to you the first few psukim, right? Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning, Hashem created the shamayim v'aretz, the heavens and the earth. V'haaretz hayta tohu v'vo v'choshech al pnei hatahom. And the earth was chaotic, and there was darkness upon the depths. And the spirit of Hashem was fluttering on the face of the water. So we don't see water created there. Water just exists. The world comes into existence, and water is already there. But the whole thing is water already there. There's no, even it says Hashem created Shemayim v'aretz. We don't see aretz. It's just water. And Hashem says, Vayior, and there's light, and there's darkness, and it's the first day. So now the lights are turned on, and you can see what's going on. So you have this chaotic place, but the lights are turned on. So now you can see what's happening. And the next day, let's see. Hashem says there should be a rakia b'toch hamayim. So we have mayim that's everywhere, but there should be a rakia there. And so now you have a separation on the second day of upper waters and lower waters, but you still don't have anything dry yet. but you do have two sets of waters, and the upper one is called Shamayim. There is water, and that's the second day. Now you have on the third day, Yikavu Hamayim mitachat hashamayim. The waters that are under the Shamayim should gather together. And when they gather together, the dry earth pops out. And now the dry earth is called Aretz. And the Mikvah Mayim is what the pasuk says. That's called the seas, or the Mikvah Mayim. So that's where we first see the word Mikvah, is in Mikvah Mayim. So that's our introduction to water, and our introduction to Mikvah, and our introduction to Yikavu, right, to the gathering. So a mikvah is a gathering of waters. But so let's think about what that gathering is, and what that means, and what the waters are. Mikvah is related to the word hope, tikva. As you know, hope is about what's going ahead, where we're going towards, not where we're coming from. So the whole mikvah concept, its own self, is about leaving your past behind, going into a space where there is nothingness, and coming out reborn. So it is about a hope towards where you're headed. Let's see what that looks like, though. It's fascinating to think about water. I was thinking about, and I did not get to ask this question in shul for my usual person that I see, but we have a pasuk, b'damayich chayi, right? Through your blood shall you live, through your blood shall you live. We think about the life through blood, whether it's the blood of korbanot, or it's the blood of birth, or it's the blood of bris. But there's a lot of blood through which we live, blood that brings life. But really it's water. I mean, the deeper concept is water that gives birth to life. And if you think about the whole world like an amniotic sac, right? The world is born in water first. So the entire earth is held in an amniotic sac. And then the waters break and the earth pops through, and the earth is born as the Yikavu Hamayim, and there's Aretz and water. So you have the birth of the earth there coming out of the waters. And then from the earth comes human beings, and then the human beings arising from the earth itself, Adamah, right? Adam from Adamah, and Chava from Adam. And then inside Chava is her womb, and an amniotic sac in which that next human being is held, and they pop forth into the world. Like the earth comes into existence, so does that human being come into existence. And it's interesting to think about the tumah that's left behind in the mother as the child comes into the world. And then the child is there in the world. We'll pause there for a second, because there's a whole line here to think about. How does this water work? How does the water give birth to the next thing? Okay, so let's just think about the womb, the rechem, giving birth to what's coming next. If you arrange the letters of rechem, you get machar, tomorrow. There is a tomorrowness inside rechem. The rechem is about bringing you to the next place. So the womb is a point of transition from the last world, the world of souls, into this world where we are holding right now. And the womb is sometimes also in Kabbalistic sources called the kever, the grave. And the grave is similar to the womb in that both of them are places of transition from one world to the next. So we have transition from world of souls into this world through the womb, and transition from this world back into world of souls in the kever. And they both involve that water, right? So we have the amniotic fluid in the womb, and we break out of that. And then going into the kever, we have the tahara process of the Chaver Kadisha, where water is poured all over the mace, and the mace is getting ready to transition into the next world, really getting ready, not just to transition to the next world, but getting ready for tchiyah, getting ready for a rebirth, a realignment. And water is used at that time too to create a tahara. So we have these two spaces, and just for rhyming, I'll call them womb and tomb, right? So we have the womb and the tomb on either side of our existence. And they're both places of transition. They're both places where we exist without breath. In the womb, we don't breathe. In the tomb, we don't breathe. So we have these two places of transition, breathless existence that's transition from one realm to another. But this whole world is about transition from that one realm to another. And we go through so many disparate experiences in this world, places of brokenness and difficulty, taking you back to Rabbi Nachman's song, Kol Ha'olam Kulo Gesher Tsar Ma'od, Va'ikar Lo Lefached. This whole world is a very narrow bridge. A bridge from the world of souls to the world of souls. The whole world is just bridging world of souls to world of souls. And there's lots of narrow places on this bridge that are scary to go through. And the Yikar is Lo Lefached. The main thing is don't be scared, meaning keep walking forward, because the end is the world of souls. The end is where you're headed, who you are as you've transitioned, who you've become along the way. How will you get there? And the only way there is through. There's lots of scary spots, but the only way there is through the fear, through the broken, through the difficulty to get to wholeness on the other side. And on the other side of wholeness is broken again. I mean, that's the bridge. You go from whole to broken to whole so many times through this bridge. So in all those places of brokenness, how do we gather up those broken parts? How do we become whole again? I mean, tshuva is a process, or therapy is a process, or a hugs and love are a process. And so is Yikavu Hamayim. Mikvah is a process of achieving wholeness again. The gathering in of all our disparate parts, a place of connectedness, a way to settle into something that we go back into the primordial waters, back into the womb. In between womb and tomb, we have this water spot that is a place of breathless existence that allows us to transition from where we were to where we're going, and have a spot in this world where we can connect to before this world. That's why water is created before the world came into being. Of course, it's part of the primordial creation, but we have this concept of 10 Mamarei Breshit, 10 different statements of Hashem that brought this world into being. But if you count them, there's only 9 Vayihis. So our Kabbalists say, what's the 10th? The 10th is actually the word Breshit itself. That word is holds everything, and from that, everything is differentiated. So water is in that word. So the whole beginningness, everything is included in water, and we can achieve that again as we go deep into that water. We can go back to our beginningness and have everything gathered back together. All our disparate parts, all the fragments, all the brokenness can be brought back together and refocused there in the mikvah. And then we come out the other side towards a new future and something new ahead. That's actually the gift of Rosh Chodesh. Is our first mitzvah as the Jewish people is Rosh Chodesh. Chodesh is Elechem l'Rosh Chodeshim. This month shall be to you the first of all months. But Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch teaches that differently. He says, a Chadash is Elechem l'Rosh Chodeshim. This newness shall be to you the first of all newnesses. It's our first communal mitzvah as a people coming out of Mitzrayim. Hashem says, guys, colloquially, says, guys, where you're going, you're going to need a superpower, and I'm going to give it to you right now. And that superpower is the capacity to make a new start. You're never trapped in where you were. There's nothing that can hold you back to going where you need to go. You don't have to count the same way as the Mitzrim counted. You don't count by the sun. The sun makes a year, which is a shana. Shana means repeat, like vishinantam levanecha. You should repeat these words to your children. A shana is a repetition, going in circles, constantly repeating. Where you guys are going, start counting by the moon, chodesh. Count the months, chadash. Always make it new. Not a repetition, but a newness, constantly. Start fresh. That's your capacity. That's your superpower. And I'm going to give you the tool to do that. The tool to do that is the mikvah. You step inside, leave your past behind, and come out with a new tomorrow. That is your superpower in this world, is you're never stuck where you started. You always get to choose a new future. So the mikvah is that space where we go in, and the dimensions of the mikvah, there's all kinds of stuff, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the number 40 of water that are in there. It's the measure of a human being, the amount that can completely cover a human. Water itself has those mems in it, the mem of mayim. It's always water, as you know, is always in plural. There's no you can't say it singular, just like chaim, you can't say singular. I could say alive, but not life, singular. And water's also always in plural, mem yud mem. But the mem part, the mem is 40, is the number of transition. 40 days of the flood of the world, which is fascinating because what was that? That was also taking the whole planet and putting it back in a mikvah, right? Just the whole thing needed to get dipped because things were going awry and the whole planet had to go back underwater to regain a new birth as it came out. So 40 days of the flood, 40 days of a vlad to take its shape, 40 days to receive the Torah. There's so many different 40s that we have, 40s as a number of transition or actualization coming into being, and it's in what it needs to be. So the mikvah itself is that 40, that space of 40ness that we go in to create, to effect a transition. So as human beings, we have this capacity to transcend our nature. That I would say that's probably one of the definitions of being human. You know, we've tried to figure that out. Science has tried to figure it out. What makes a human different than an animal? Clearly, we're animals and we're humans. What makes us different? Oh, maybe we have language, or maybe we use tools. Except for now, we've discovered otters use tools to crack open shells, and bees have language to communicate where the honey, where the nectar is. And you know, so is that what makes us human? So I would say that probably our deeper sources. I mean, we talk about speech. Speech is different than language. Actually, no other animal speaks with words like we do. They communicate with a language, but not words. But it's also the ability to transcend instinct. We are animals. We have instinct, but we can transcend it. We don't have to answer to our instincts. We can have a mitzvah that causes us to be more, to reach further, to go past our instincts. So not everything that we want, like where it says specifically, Lo taturu acharei levavchem ve'acharei einechem. Don't follow just your heart and your eyes. That's your instinct. Don't just go where you feel like it, where your body pushes you to go. No, actually, you have the capacity to do more than that. And the mikveh is that too, where we say, oh, we don't have to just answer to whatever it is that we desire. We actually have the capacity to transcend instinct and to become greater than that. That is the concept of gadol hametzuva. We become greater through commandments. They expand us to beyond where we would like to be, where we feel like going. Once we're commanded, we push ourselves past where we feel like going into becoming something bigger. Gadol hametzuva. So we have this here. So let's talk about for a minute what the mikveh helps us transition between tuma and tahara. So what is tuma as a concept? So I'm sure most of you are familiar. Rav Hirsch's explanation of tuma is any kind of connection with death, a death energy. So we have tuma in so many different places, but let's just look at the word for a second. Tam, tet mem, aleph, silent aleph, tuma. Tam means concealed, like tum, concealed, tum halev, the concealment of the heart, or a tum that's born is somebody whose gender is concealed. You can't tell by looking at the genitalia if it's male or if it's female, it's concealed. Hatmana is to conceal something, to cover something. So tam Hashem, tam aleph could be tam Hashem, you're concealed from Hashem, or Hashem is concealed from you. There's a veil between you and your connection, your deeper connection with Hashem. Something's out of alignment there. There's a disconnect, and that's what the death energy is there's an out of alignment, or an out of an ability to move, to create, to become. We are, right now it's very fashionable to say human beings, not human doings, but that's not actually us. We're actually human doings. That's us. You know, in terms of who we are as Torah Jews, we're always moving to the next. We don't take a time to pause. Shabbos is the time to pause so that we get a chance to just be, and that's what Shabbos should be. But the rest of the time, it's actually a positive. Some people see it as a positive commandment. 6 days, push ahead. 6 days, go do. 6 days, work hard. 1 day, dwell in. So we have this constant rhythm of work towards dwell in, which is supposed to bring us to a Shabbos concept. It brings us me'ein olam haba. This whole world is work towards aretz, roots, constantly running towards. This world is a run. Living on earth is a running towards. Roots means I will run. As opposed to the next world, which you call shamayim, it could either be shamayim or shamnis. I'm just there. There's no running in shamayim. Just you're there. It's shamness. Sham. I'm sham. So here I'm working towards, there I'm dwelling in. And Shabbos helps us see that 6 days work towards, 1 day dwell in. And in the dwelling in is, in the working towards is where we create the connection here, and the dwelling in is where the connection happens in the next world. Let's talk about, so that's tum'ah, is the disconnection from the energy that we're supposed to be connected with, or the inability to work towards. When we're so frazzled, let's just say, whether it's from abuse or whether it's from workaholism, whether it's from alcoholism, whether it's from over shopping or over anything, whether it's from anything that's trying to quell the brokenness inside of us. When there's a brokenness, when there's a deep need to cover it up, and we are working so hard to drown it out with sound, with activity, with food, with drink, with drugs, with whatever it is, with shopping, with acquiring, with decorating, we're drowning. So we're so frazzled that we're not connected to a growth energy. That is a death energy, actually. Even in that running like in a hamster wheel is just a disconnection. That's what Tumah is, all concealed. Tahara, on the other hand, is revealed. It's really, tahor is related to the word sohar, the light that was in the ark. And the Tevat Noach, there's a sohar there. And the two words are related. Tahor, sohar are related linguistically. But the concept of light is related to day. We see there's a pasuk in Shemot, Etzem Hashemayim Latahor, about the daylight, or when our Kabbalists talk about moonlight in the daytime, they talk about Shraga Betihira, the light in the day. What is moonlight in the day? Tihira is daylight. So light or clarity, the ability to see things, to be connected. That's what Tahara is. But think about now the Beit HaMikdash. Beit HaMikdash is a place of freshness, of clarity, of newness, of vision, of seeing. Even the way the windows in the Beit HaMikdash are created, they're created so that they are, they are small on the outside and wide on the inside, because the light transference in the windows goes from the inside of the Beit HaMikdash out, because the concept of light is generated inside the Beit HaMikdash. It's not like the Beit HaMikdash needs the light of the sun to illuminate it. It's that the Beit HaMikdash is the illuminator of the world, so the light goes out. And inside the Beit HaMikdash, everything is fresh. And that's the connection. That's what Tahara is. It's a place of Kedusha and Tahara. And Tahara is freshness, connection, ever-flowing life, no death energy. It's interesting. I just learned in preparing for this that, of course, we know the Kohanim go to the mikvah many times during the course of their avoda in the Beit HaMikdash. But if a Kohen has to relieve himself during the course of his avoda, if he has to go use the bathroom, if he has to pass out solid matter, goes to the mikvah after that too, because there's a death energy even in that, right? What has left behind, there is whatever the dead cells that come out in that requires mikvah use for a Kohen inside the Beit HaMikdash during the avoda. There's that extra awareness of Tumah and Tara. But think about the Lechem Apanim inside the Beit HaMikdash, always fresh, because it's a place of always freshness in that space, and always fresh. And here's something fascinating to think about. Inside the Beit HaMikdash, the days are counted differently than the days outside of the Beit HaMikdash. Our days, as we know, begin at night and end at night. But the days inside the Beit HaMikdash begin in the morning and end in the morning, because they begin in freshness and light and go through the brilliance of the day and the darkness of the night and the deep darkness of what we might think of Galus, exile, nighttime, scary, but they end in freshness and light again. As opposed to our days, which begin as the sun sets and go into darkness and fear and then freshness in the morning and the brilliance of the day. But then it ends again with demise, with the sun going down. And we actually have 2 years that parallel that too. When we talk about Rosh Hashanah, we're talking about a year. It's kind of ending at sunset, like our day, right? Going into the fall, it's like when the sun is setting and we go into the darkness. It goes fall, it gets dark, going darkness of winter and the deep darkness of midnight. And then we have the spring, the dawn, and then we move into the brilliance of the summer, midday. But the year ends again at sunset in the fall. As opposed to, that's the year that starts in the 7th month, right? That we count the year by. So that's a fall to fall year. But the Beit HaMikdash year, the year of who we actually are, the year that we're supposed to count, the first month is Nisan. So really the first month is fresh, brand new spring. And we go through spring and it takes us through the summer and we go through the winter, but we end up in freshness and newness. So the spiritual date inside the Beit HaMikdash, the spiritual year, starting with month 1, Nisan, is always starts in freshness and newness, goes through trial and travail, but ends in freshness and newness and hope again. Whereas physicality, our physical day and our physical year, starts with the end of summer with our grains gathered in, our produce gathered in, but then it goes into a scary time and then a lovely time, but ends again in darkness. We start in darkness and we end in darkness. That's what physical is. But spiritual always starts in light and ends in light. No matter what it goes through, it ends in hope. So the mikveh is about that hope. It's about going from darkness to light. That you have the opportunity to go from where you were, whatever was scattered, whatever is all over the place, whatever is fearful, whatever is disconnected, into a space of release and then freshness and hope. So let's talk about, just for a minute, a kavana in going into the mikvah. I have a few kavanas. Okay, the reason why I'm talking about this right now, all of this, just to reground it in who we are as mikvah attendants and how we create the space in which another flourishes. The more you have inside of you, even if you don't share it, even if you don't say it, the more you understand, what am I facilitating? I'm facilitating an amazing journey for this human being to dip into the primordial waters of pre-creation and leave behind their past and come out with a whole new future. I'm facilitating an amazing gift that the Jewish people have of hitchut right here, right now, in recognizing the beginning of a cycle. Think also about, when does a woman go to the mikvah? She goes in that freshness and newness, right? Because she's going at that very beginning of the capacity to conceive, and she's going to go into the fullness of her capacity and then into the shedding of it, but then comes back around to that beginning. So it's the beginning, just like Kiddush Levana, when we look for the new moon in the sky, we're looking up for what's fresh and not full yet, fresh and new. And we're recognizing that. The men are recognizing that. And as the men look at that, they say, please Hashem, restore the koach of Kallah Yisrael, who's the feminine vis-a-vis God. Restore the koach of women who are a whole different class. We won't talk about it now, but temporarily diminished here, but they need to have their energy restored. But we're looking at what's fresh and new and looking towards where it can go. And the mikveh is that too, fresh and new in this state and where you can go, where you're headed. So if we understand that, then we create in us an energetic reality of inviting somebody into a space of something much bigger than just a physical walk from a bathroom to undressing, to getting wet, to dipping, to coming out, to getting dry, to redressing and leaving. If somebody, and so many people think of it as that, okay, it's just something you have to do every month. You go to this place, you get undressed, you get clean, you get dipped, you get dressed, you get dry, you get dressed, you leave. Unless we can hold it bigger. It doesn't mean that every single time we could for sure have more kavanas every single time, should we so choose. We don't have to explain this every single time. But the more that we know this, the more that we create the energetic reality, that person can tap into it because we hold it for them. Just like an ima, an aim, ima's Aramaic, as you know, so it has the aleph at the end of it. Ima and ava are Aramaic words, so that the Hebrew word is av and aim. Aim, the root of aim, is the same as the root of the word emunah, right? The emunah comes through the mother. That steadiness, that knowledge, that knowing comes through the mother. It's brought into the world through the energy of the mother. So we, as the mikvah attendant, in a way, can be that mother energy that holds this space through which this entire experience can exist. Even if we don't say it, the more we know, the more we hold it, the more somebody else can experience this energetic connection inside the mikvah. Okay, let's talk about for a minute what it could be like going into the mikvah. How does this distancing and rebirth happen? So there are 3 stages, and I'm going to share some things with you. I love R.A. Kaplan's book, Waters of Eden, but I will share it just so that you should know where you could look if you want to. Secrets of the Mikvah, Rav Dov Ber Pinson, has some really fascinating things. A lot of it is stuff that pertains to men, since he's a man writing about mikvah and mikvah use for men. There's some fascinating things in there too, but they pertain to women as well. So should we so choose, we could have these kavanas in mind. The first, going into the mikvah, there's a hachana. There's a, how do you say hachana in English? An acceptance, a humbly accepting our lives as it is, right? So this is something I talk to, let's say people are struggling with fertility or older singles. You know, how do they accept their life the way it is and at the same time desperately wish for and daven that it should be different? Both, right? To know that it's the Ratzon Hashem, that they're in the position that they're in, and also Hashem wants our tefillos, not as a magic bullet, but to say that we want things to change. So there has to be both. Hashem, I totally accept where you've placed me today, and at the same time, I'm asking you, please take me out of this by tomorrow. You know, there's both, right? So that we could have that hachna. You put me here, Hashem. I totally accept it. I recognize it and accept it. So that's walking into the mikvah and standing on the floor, standing up. Acceptance. Here I am, how I am. This is who I am, where I am in this space. That's that standing right there. Hachna, acceptance of who I am, how I am, with whatever circumstances there are. Then there's the dip under the waters. That's Havdalah, step 2. So first is Hachna, and next comes Havdalah, the separation, the distancing, going into the waters. Water is what cleans away. It's not that it's a physical thing, because of course you need that physical cleanliness before you go into the mikvah. It's not that it's taking away anything physical. Nevertheless, water is an analog, not a representation of, but a physical manifestation of the ability to release. So let me pause here for just well, I'll say that in a minute. Havdalah, immersing in the water. So now you're thinking about the 4 walls of the mikvah surrounding you, like that mem sofit, actually. Most mikvaot are in a square. They're most of them, because there is a Kabbalistic reason for it to look like a mem sofit, like the end of the mem in the word mayim, that has corners and walls. So, and that's a whole long, interesting thing that pays to look into if you're curious, but not for now. Anyway, you as you dip into that water, there you think about the Shem Hashem, that is the Yud Ke Vav Ke Shem Hashem. The first one, I forgot about the first, the Hachna, standing on the floor, accepting who you are, how you are. The Shem Hashem that you can focus on is Ad Hashem, because Hashem's in charge of everything. That's the Adon of everything. So that's the Hachna, Adon. But now going under the waters with the Havdalah, you think about the Shem Hashem that's Yud Ke Vav Ke. Yud Ke Vav Ke is Haya. It's Haya Hove Yeh. It's all things at all times. There's no time in that, right? It's past, present, future. It's all mixed in together. So inside that, you're in the primordial water underneath, completely separating the Havdalah from where you were, from how you entered. So there's the Hachna, the acceptance of how you entered, but now underneath, you are separating from that. And as you come up out of the waters, there's the Hamtaka, the sweetening of it all. It's again emerging from the amniotic sac. Think about Yikavu Hamayim, and the earth pops forth. Think about that amniotic sac and the baby pops forth. So the surface of the water is like the surface of the amniotic sac right there. And as you come forth from that, you're reborn into a fresh reality. And so you're thinking about the surface there, and the Shem Hashem that you're thinking about that there is the Eheyeh, Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh, is the I will be. Right? That's one of the Shemot Hashem. And Behalachta Bedrachav, we could be that way too. We are supposed to be like Hashem. Not that we are Hashem at all, but we could behave like Hashem. And there's a I will be-ness to us. The future of us, as we step out of the mikvah, the future is waiting for us. We've left behind what was, and we're stepping into a new reality, coming back to life. So in the mikvah, again, like womb and tomb, we are in a breathless state of existence. There's only 3 mitzvot altogether that we do with our whole body, full body immersion. And that is Yishuv Haaretz, right? Dwelling in the land of Israel. Yishuv Leishev Basukah, sitting in the sukkah, is a full body immersion, and going to the mikvah, full body immersion. 3 full body immersion experiences, 3 full body immersion mitzvahs. But the mikvah is the only one that the breath is not involved. Right? You have to hold your breath. So that is like the womb and the tomb, that you're in a state of breathless existence, but in this world. So you have gone into this cell of, if you think about the mikvah, cell of transition, gone into that space. So it's a very exciting thing to understand where we are. If you understand what the mikvah is, it's like a doorway into a whole new world. I don't know about any of you, but whether you're Harry Potter fans or any other science fiction thing, but this is the magic in a way, lahavdil, but in a way of the Torah. Like it's the door to a whole new world. It's like I used to love reading as a child, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the Chronicles of Narnia. You open a door and you just go into that wardrobe, but in the back of the wardrobe is the whole new world and a whole different experience. And that's the mikveh is. You walk into a tiny little pool of water, but when you're in there, you connect into a whole different world, all of pre-creation and your own capacity to become something completely different. And then you step back out again. So it really is, we are the shepherds of somebody going into a completely transformative experience. And we have that capacity to help them get there. Now, for our own kavanas, just for a minute, let's just talk about what it's like to get into that mikvah. So we talked about the immersion, but there is the preparation and the exit also. So there's the undressing and the redressing as we go into the mikvah. So undressing, everybody knows that when they put on their shoes, right, in the morning, there's a way to dress, right? You put on your left and then you put on your right and then your left, and then you tie the left and then tie the right. So why do we do that? We're leading with the strong side of us. If you're left-handed, check with your Rav if you switch it or not. But just let's say for the Rove, who are right-handed, you start with your right side, which represents chesed. So you want to engage that first. You start your day on the right. So you put your right foot into the shoe first, but you don't bind it up yet because chesed shouldn't be bound yet. Then you put in your left. Your weaker side represents your Yetzer Hara, represents din, represents difficulty. You want to bind that up right away. So you tie that right away. And then you go and tie up the chesed. That also has to have its boundaries, but you want to give it a little space first. So you start with the right and you go to the left, you bind the left, then you bind the right. So in the same way that we have that, it's much expanded for how we undress and dress. So undressing, especially anytime, but going to the mikvah particularly, there is a way to peel away the layers as you're leaving your past behind. As you walk into that room and think, okay, this is what I'm about to do. I'm about to leave all this pirud behind, all this unfreshness behind, all this death energy and disconnection energy. I'm leaving it behind. And how do I do that? I take a breath and then I go bottom to top, left to right, out to in. So you start by removing your shoes, bottom to top, and you go left to right. You take off your left shoe first. And then you're right. And then you go out to in also. So you start by taking off shoes and socks, and then you go with your outermost garment first. And you also, if you can, go bottom to top. So if you're wearing a skirt and a top, your skirt comes off first and then your top. And it's left and right. You take out your left arm first. Like you don't have to get caught in all this, just to know there's a way to peel away the layers. And there's a way to release everything. And you could have the kavanah that everything's being released as you release all those layers. Step into the shower, the bath, whatever it is, to release some more and get ready to go into the mikvah, where we have this, again, these three processes of hachana, havdalah, hamtaka, the acceptance, the separation, and the sweetening as we're in the immersion. And then as we dress, it's also the opposite. We start top to bottom and in to out and right to left, that we regird ourselves in freshness. And we know we're not the same as how we came in. We can be fresh and new and go out in a different way. Okay, with that, I'm just gonna 8:53, 10:53 for you. I guess I'm gonna say another thing just before we get to, I'll keep going. I was gonna pause for questions, but maybe we'll just save them to the end. Thinking about the word mikvah, we have mikvah and we have tikva in it, kaveh. We also have kav. There's a line that's drawn between the mikvah and to the hope of the future. But when you look backwards on mikvah, when you look back on what you've done, what do you see? The whole word itself, spelled backwards, is hukam, arisen, or I have caused to exist, hukam. I've made it exist. Right? So the mikvah is the place where we go towards hope. We have this line of gathering things up, creating the hope for the future, resetting things. It's like, and I never do this, my husband's constantly on my case to restart my computer. It needs to be restarted on a regular basis. That rebooting allows literally all the digital fragments that are happening inside our computers need to be brought back together. And that only happens with a restart. That's why things get messy and you start to lose information if you haven't restarted in a while. The restart resets everything. So the mikvah is that restart. But in the end, you get to hukam. You look back and you see the life that you created by this hope, by this line, by this walking towards, by this gathering up. You've created something with strength that is existing and enduring, that has kayama. So, and then we talk about zera shel kayama also, which we want a lasting seed, but we've created something lasting, whether there's zera involved or not. We in our lives create something lasting when we regather ourselves and restart and refresh and renew and walk towards a tahara energy and away from the tuma energy as much as we can. Okay, let me just see. Okay, where I want to go. It's interesting to think about how the earth is 70% water, and so are human beings. 70% water. And we have that relationship that each person is, as we know, an olam katan. Each one of us is a world unto ourselves. So even in that physical way, there's that analog that we're made up of the same stuff as the planet. Each one is a world to themselves, even in the physical makeup. And how the water helps us. Water is, again, can never be said in the singular because it's always plural. Water brings things together. It's interesting because water can also make things separate apart. If you're trying to unstick something, you need water to help it soak it and unstick it. But soaking can also bring together. So just all the different qualities of water, there's so much to learn. I also listened to a shir of Yehuda Spolshevsky on water, and just all the qualities of water, which I recommend for another time. And let me just see where I want to bring you to. Okay, so in thinking about what death is and how we want to move away from that death energy, a way that we do that is through water, not just through mikvah, but water altogether. Whether it's water pouring over, like we do in a tahara. Some funeral homes have a mikvah for the mace, but a lot do a pouring over of Tisha Kabim. We do a pouring over of water too, a raising up of water to make it be alive again and pour it over our hands when we do a tahara process, whether it's to eat or to move away from a death energy, which is the morning. When we do Negelvasser in the morning, why do we do that? It's because we're 1/60th dead when we're sleeping, whatever that means. But and I've known that for a while. It was interesting to switch when somebody said, so imagine death is 60 times sleep. I never thought about it that way. That the sleeping energy is a holding back of our ability to be in a creative process. We have a lot of stuff that we're processing while we're sleeping. Sleep isn't death, but we do have an aspect of our soul that leaves us while we're sleeping and goes to other realms to gather whatever chemla. When we talk about Hashem, you returned my soul to me. The chemla, with chemla. Where's the chemla come from? Where does that gift come from? Our Kabbalists tell us that part of our soul, higher elements of our soul, does leave our body at night and go to other realms to receive the chemla and come back and deliver it to the rest of our soul for the use during the day. But since a piece of our soul was gone, that means we were up a little bit dead while we slept, because that's our definition of death, is when the soul leaves the body, right? So here a little sliver of our soul left our body, not the whole thing, and now it came back. And so Kabbalistically, we have this death energy on our bodies, but it all concentrates in our fingertips once we wake up. And we do wash the six ways, not like for bread, right? But that the way that we wash when we leave a cemetery, because it's a death energy that we are releasing from our body at the time as we pour water over. So the water does help. Again, in this place, it helps with a new birth into a new day. And there's that bridge between where we were and where we're going, where we were at the end of the day, where we're going at the beginning of the day. We initiate the day with that water that helps with a new birth into a fresh start, a fresh day. And that brings us back to the Chaver Kadisha Tahara too, because yes, your life is over, but you're going to a fresh place, to a fresh start. And so there's a water that prepares you to go to that fresh place with a fresh start. But the water is about separating you from where you were to where you're going, to creating freshness, to bringing together what was frazzled and making it whole again. So you have a fresh start to head into a fresh place. So I'll just end with a bracha that all of us should be zocha to bring women through an experience that allows them to leave behind whatever it needs to be left behind. All the challenges, spiritual, emotional, physical, financial, all of them should be left behind. Go into the mikvah and come out with a fresh start, capacity to make new changes, make new realities, make new families, make new relationships, make new things in the world on a regular basis. So we should be zeicha to guide women through the capacity to create newness in their lives.
Thank you, Eliza, for your inspiring messages and for joining us in our Q&A panel in the later part of our program.
Pleasure.
And now I'd like to introduce Chevy Samet, who is a Kallah teacher, Torah educator, and coordinator of the core Kallah teacher community of practice, where she works to build supports and provide educational opportunities to Kallah teachers internationally. We are privileged to have you here with us today. Chevy Samet.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I am notoriously non-techie, so the fact that I unmuted myself before I started speaking is like, I think I'm giving myself a round of applause. Thank you, Eliza. Okay, so a little bit about me and about kind of why am I somebody who is about this very delicate and sensitive topic of, teaching a Kallah who has survived abuse, and where am I going to be speaking to you about that topic from? So, as was mentioned, I'm a Kallah teacher pretty early on in my Kallah teaching career, which I fell into quite young. I was sitting across from a Kallah. She was somewhere between my second and my fourth Kallah, so very early on. And in the course of our conversation, we were probably about halfway through our learning, she disclosed to me that she had been sexually abused. And of course, I immediately froze. And I felt incredibly overwhelmed, way out of my depths. You know, later on, I would kind of go through the process of thinking, okay, you know, does she need to be taught differently? How does she need to be taught differently? What are some things that, you know, I need to know because I knew nothing? But I also realized in that moment that this was the very first time that I was sitting across from someone, to my knowledge, who had been sexually abused. And that felt very overwhelming. And incredibly humbling also. You know, at this point, you know, this is going back 10 years ago, right? So I knew sexual abuse existed. I mean, at that point, Baruch Hashem, like, who didn't know? But I also realized no one's ever told me this about themselves before. So certainly statistically, I had been in the presence of other survivors, and I probably in my head at that time would still refer to her as a victim of sexual abuse. And we'll hopefully talk a little bit about language shortly. It's not a word that I gravitate toward anymore, right? But it was incredibly humbling and it was incredibly overwhelming. And because I fell into Kallah teaching so young, I had the gift of knowing that I knew nothing, which is an incredible gift. One that I wish all of us never forget, right? So I immediately emailed every single therapist whose email address I had. It was not that many at the time. Some of them had, you know, were not trauma therapists. They're like, I'm a play therapist for 9-year-olds with anxiety, like really nothing, but I didn't know what else to do. And I got back one response that was quasi helpful. But I kept going because it was clear to me that I knew nothing. And it was also clear to me that there was something here that I should know. And that kind of led me down this road of, okay, like teaching this demographic of Kallah. And I always say that it is a testament to our community that we have grown and really learned to the point where we have adults, young adults in our community who have, you know, had the privilege of treatment, who have worked incredibly hard on working through their past traumas, including abuse, to the point where they are now in a place where they can enter into a healthy relationship with another person. I don't know that we could have said that as easily, right, 25, 30 years ago. So the fact that we're here and we have these, you know, these young adults who are in an emotional and a physical place where they can get married is incredible. It also means that as a community of educators, we need to step up to meet their unique needs. So we're kind of playing catch up a little bit. And over the years, I have spent a lot of time and money on private supervision with clinicians, a lot of time in conversations with Rabbanim and other college teachers, just trying to learn as much as I can, reading a ton. If people want a book list, I'm happy to email that out of some of my recommendations, and really just trying to gather information. And every couple of months, or at the beginning of every couple of months, and at this point, probably once a year, I'll look around and I'll say, okay, so who's doing something about this? Where's the curriculum? Where's the and it seems to not be there. So there are, Baruch Hashem, a lot of efforts moving in that direction, some incredible you know, initiatives that I hope you'll be aware of sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, you know, when people say, what is your training? My background is in education. My education is in education. I am an educator, which means that I am approaching this topic not as a mental health professional. And I'll probably say that more times over the next hour than you care to hear. I am not a mental health professional. I have gathered, you know, a fair amount of knowledge on the topic, but I am approaching this conversation as an educator. And it's really, really key that we maintain that distinction, because the goal of this presentation is it's not really a training. I don't think we can train anyone in anything in 55 minutes, unless it's like how to cut bangs. And then, like, I don't know, even that, I'm not so sure. I think it takes longer, right? So it's certainly not a training, but it is a conversation starter. And we are trying to build a fair amount of awareness. Now, I think my personal belief is that we have become over the years very aware about the existence of abuse, right? And we become very aware of the impact of abuse. And now I'd like to take that a little bit further. And can we become aware of some of the responses that are mandated when we are in the presence of someone who has survived abuse? I also think that it's important, you know, that we talk about why this matters so much. So, you know, I was trying to think of an analogy. I love analogies. I'm a visual thinker. So I was trying to think of a good analogy for this. And I was sitting in my grandmother's apartment. I recently went to visit my grandmother with my son who's in yeshiva. I drove him all the way to Montreal, and then we turned around, we drove all the way back. I'm sitting in my grandmother's apartment, and the paint in her apartment is peeling terribly. And when I said something to my mother, she said, we really would love to repaint her apartment, but unfortunately my grandmother has really advanced dementia, and it would be very troubling and unsettling to her, right? And as I'm looking around this apartment, I'm thinking, okay, you have all this peeling paint, but what would happen if somebody just how disruptive could it be if somebody just came in and paint it over? Just come with your paint roller and just I don't know, make it look a little bit nicer, right? But of course, we know that's not possible, because if you're going to just try and paint over all of these cracks and peels, right, you're not going to have anything that it's probably going to look worse, honestly, than before, right? You need to really treat the walls with respect, okay? Are there any cracks that need to be spackled? Is there old paint that needs to kind of be chipped away? We have to prep the canvas, right, in order for the paint to really be able to be long lasting on this wall, right? It might look pretty even, for a few weeks, but it's going to start peeling if you're painting it on top of a compromised surface. And that's, I think, a helpful way to look at what are we trying to accomplish in our teaching of Kallahs who have experienced abuse. Now, we are not going to be the ones necessarily, right, who are treating this surface. That's not our role here, but we are the painters, which means that if we're looking at a wall, and then I'm going to stop at this analogy because it's going too far, right? If we're looking at a wall and we say, this needs something else before I can come in and do my work, or really this needs something else, but that other thing is either not available or, not welcome by the person. So what can I do to make the best of a potentially compromised situation? Okay. I also think that it's really important that we distinguish between trauma and abuse. And when I say distinguish, I mean only for the purpose of this conversation. If we wanted to give a presentation on how to teach a Kallah who has experienced trauma in her life, I don't think I would even agree to do that in an hour, because it really is impossible. And I think it's fair to say that all abuse is traumatic, right? But not all trauma is necessarily abusive or would fall under the umbrella of abuse. So I did notice that many of the questions that came in kind of, spilled over a little bit into the kind of trauma realm. And if we can get to some of them, that would be great. We'll certainly try. But for the purpose of this conversation, we are going to try and narrow our focus and hone in specifically on abuse, which I would consider kind of, if you're thinking about the umbrella of trauma. So this is kind of like a subcategory. And then even within abuse, we have different categories, and we're hopefully going to touch on some of those. So please understand that in no way is this presentation exhaustive. There are going to be things like, well, why didn't you say this? Either I should have and I forgot, or I didn't know and please teach me, right? Or it didn't fit into the most, the narrowest conversation. And in order to be as comprehensive as possible in one specific vein, I'm going to try and keep things narrow. And then if we have time, we'll hopefully broaden. So we are specifically today talking about a Kallah who has been abused in some capacity over the course of her life. Now, what is abuse? How do we define abuse? If you were to Google, how does one define abuse? You would have pages and pages and pages of answers to sift through, because even among mental health professionals, there isn't necessarily like one agreed upon, definition. It's fair to say, however, that abuse is a pattern of behavior, okay? Although it can also be a one-time event. So here I am already contradicting myself, right? But there is an element of fear. And there is an element of crossing of a boundary. Now, when I say crossing of a boundary, I know boundaries are like a hot word. Everybody loves to talk about their boundaries. Want to hear my boundaries? If you tell me your boundaries, I'll tell you my boundaries. Maybe that's a crossing of boundaries, right? But when I say a crossing of boundaries, I mean that either somebody is entering your physical space in a way that is undesired or intolerable to you, right? Or emotionally entering your emotional landscape in a way that is undesirable to you, harmful to you, and there's an element of fear, right? And it is important that we make that distinction. Not so much, practically it doesn't make a lot of difference to the person who's experiencing it necessarily, but it can make a very big difference in the language that we use. We tend to throw around words like abusive a lot. Oh my gosh, that was abusive. And what we really mean was, I didn't like it. Just because you didn't like it does not mean it was abusive. It means you didn't like it, right? So I think that we do have to be a little bit careful, and especially when we're talking about relationships, because it is very possible for a student of yours to have grown up in an environment that was unhealthy or dysfunctional, right? And to really have suffered from that. And that still doesn't mean that her parents were what we would call abusive. It could mean that they were limited. Now, it's also fair to say that just because something wasn't intentional doesn't mean that it wasn't abusive, because like I said, it doesn't make a ton of difference when we're discussing the impact on the person. But it does make a difference when we're having a conversation as a community about these topics, and we want to kind of stay true to what we're talking about. So I'm not going to, say, okay, we're talking about this and we're not talking about that, but I did want to try and paint that distinction in your mind. This is especially relevant, although it's not our topic for today. If your Kallahs ever come back, to discuss their relationship with you after they are married, and they are describing certain behaviors in their relationship, and this is Project Sarah's forte. I'm not going to step on their toes, certainly, right? But the distinction between a domestically violent relationship, right? The distinction between domestic violence and people who themselves have experienced trauma and are entering into this relationship, with really not the best tools and anymore. That can be a very fine line. So just something to keep in mind, right? As somebody who may be on the receiving end of, some of these conversations, it might feel very abusive to the person experiencing it, but that doesn't mean that we're going to label it. Now, luckily for us, we are educators. We are not mental health professionals, so we don't have to label anything. We can just kind of dance around the nuance, right? And keep all of these different ideas, in our minds. Okay. So speaking specifically about sexual abuse, right, and emotional abuse, those are kind of the two subcategories that I want to talk about. And we are specifically now talking about a Kallah who has experienced this in her past, okay? If you have a Kallah, we're going to talk about disclosure soon, and you suspect, or she tells you that the abuse is ongoing, meaning you are teaching her and she is still in, an unsafe environment, I'm not talking about that today. That's that's very delicate and a whole other ballgame. Although what we're talking about today is very delicate. I'm specifically now talking about a survivor of abuse, meaning somebody who is now on the other side of the experience, although the experience lives with them, which we'll certainly talk about as well, right? But it's not ongoing. I also want to divide this into two conversations, right? Which we're kind of going to have simultaneously. One is sexual abuse, and one is emotional abuse. Of course, there are other kinds of abuse. Specifically, when we're talking about, children versus, in a marital relationship. We can also talk about physical abuse. But for today, because that is somewhat less common in, the Kallah population, not uncommon at all, meaning it does exist, but less common. There's an overlap here. I'm going to stick with talking about sexual abuse and emotional abuse and kind of maintain those distinctions. So one of the first questions that a Kallah teacher will ask when she hears that, oh, and I should mention, by the way, that over the years, it just sort of by word of mouth spread that people say, oh, Chevy Samet, she can teach a Kallah like this. And then I get a call and I'm like, no, I can't. And then they're like, well, we don't know anyone else who can. And it's like, oh, I guess I'll just swallow my terror and try. Right. So the first question that I'll get is, well, how do I know? How do I know? So here's the first thing that I want to tell you. You might not know. You might not know. And I know as an educator also, I feel this way. If I have all the information, if I have as much information as possible about you, I can teach you better. And theoretically, that's true. But I think we also need to really believe that if I have the information in me of what's possible, I can teach you, right? I can teach you well. I can teach you as well as possible. I don't need to necessarily know everything about you. Sometimes as educators, we kind of need to teach from the somewhat limbo place of I'm suspecting, but I haven't had confirmation. That's okay. We can do that. We can say, I haven't had confirmation. I'm not sure. I'm teaching to a group of college teachers. I'm talking to a group of college teachers, right? So the same way we teach our college, you know what? I literally just got this text 5 minutes ago, right? I don't know if I'm staining or if this is the beginning of my period. So I'm not sure, right? And we're like, yeah, sometimes it's like that. You have to kind of hang out in this limbo until you're 100% sure. So the same thing is true here. Sometimes we can say something seems off. I'm not sure. I'm, going through, we'll talk about, assessment tools in a minute, and I'm not 100% sure. What do I do? So my personal suggestion would be tread lightly. It's okay. What's going to happen if you treat her, if you teach her as if she had this, this event in her past, and it turns out she doesn't? Nothing, because you're still teaching her very comprehensively, right? But you're teaching her with a certain sensitivity. And if as things go on, you realize like, oh, that actually isn't as necessary as I thought. I'm getting a fuller picture. Okay, I can pull back a little bit. Great. But nothing will happen if you teach her with extra sensitivity, and then afterwards you find out that it wasn't as necessary as you thought, because your teaching is still going to be comprehensive. So my personal belief is to err on the side of caution if you're not sure. Okay. But when it comes to, certain, red flags and behaviors, etc. So what is really helpful to keep in mind about, and now I'm talking about both sexual and emotional abuse. If you have a Kallah who comes in, let's say you don't know her at all. It's always nice, for those of you who teach in high school at the seminary level, if you're teaching a Kallah who you already know, it's super helpful because you have this rapport. And actually, when I started teaching, I had a rule that I only taught my high school students. And I really believed that I was going to be able to maintain that rule for my whole life. Sorry, I only teach my high school students. And then that didn't last very long. But for the period that it did last, it was incredibly helpful. And I certainly noticed the difference. And because of that, I've sort of tweaked the way I start teaching all of my Kallahs. Okay. So my first class with a Kallah is not teaching. Now, I know this sounds terrifying because we have so much to teach and so little time. And does it feel like engagements are getting shorter and shorter? Or maybe they're just calling their Kallah teachers later and later. I don't know, right? But building a rapport with your Kallah is not a waste of time. And this isn't only true so that she will feel like she can reach out to you later down the line if she has questions, although that is very significant and a big reason to want to build a rapport with her. But it's also for the current learning that you are going to do together. We, as educators, we need to be mindful of the learning environment. And a big piece of the learning environment is our relationship with the Kallah. Okay, so schmoozing with her is not a waste of time. Disclosing things about yourself, small things, right? Like saying, oh yeah, she walks into my station, there was crazy traffic. I say, yeah, I know my kid's bus was running, whatever it might be, small things about yourself. I also had a really hectic morning. I didn't even have a chance to eat yet. These are the small things that kind of create a certain amount of comfort. I'm not just coming here to be talked to, right? But there's actually someone here who will reciprocate. I feel like I'm getting to know my Kallah teacher also. And you can do this without crossing any lines of impropriety or crossing your own boundaries. It's very small. But if she feels like she's the one who's always talking about herself and you're never talking about yourself, then if she has something about herself to disclose, that will feel even more imbalanced to her, right? We have to remember that I know for myself, especially as a young Kallah teacher, I wonder how much longer I'm going to be able to say that. I hope for a long time, right? But as a younger Kallah teacher, right? So I'm always a little it's hard for me to remember that this Kallah looks at me like an older, wiser, teachery person. Okay. And that automatically, when she walks in, I think what do you mean I'm letting you into my messy home? We can't be more equal than this, but she is not seeing it that way. And especially when there has been abuse, right? So there's been this kind of invasion, right? She's been controlled in some way, right? Or been dominated in some way, right? Against her will. So she's very apprehensive about this. Is this another person, right, who might cross my lines without me wanting to? There is that hesitation. And this has nothing to do with logic, by the way, because she can know that you seem very nice, you come highly recommended, right? But there is going to be a certain amount of apprehension. So as much as we can do to kind of, create a safety with her, and that starts with building a rapport, okay? But in terms of things that you're looking out for. So, I think a lot of the questions that we ask to kind of assess for risk for pelvic pain. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these questions like, do you use tampons comfortably, right? Or do you have regular periods, right? Questions like that. Those are also questions that can sometimes give us information about her history. How does she respond to a question like, do you use tampons comfortably? So you're not only listening to the answer, you're listening to how the answer is being delivered. Okay, so is this like, you know, if she says like, yeah, I use tampons comfortably, and she goes, yeah, I use tampons. Why? Right? So again, we're looking for a pattern here. So the fact that she answers one question, right, with hesitation doesn't mean anything, but in your head, you're making a mental note. Okay. And you can explain to her, oh, you know, the reason I ask is because, whatever explanation you want to give her, and it also depends kind of where you are in your learning when you ask this question. I like to ask it right at the beginning. And I like to kind of set it up as like, okay, I'm going to ask you like a bunch of weird questions, and answer whichever ones you want to answer. It's fine. These are questions I ask everybody. And I kind of just try and downplay it. Not like so super like with a clipboard, but these are things that are helpful for me to know. Thanks so much. And then I just kind of like go one after the other. And I include also, are you afraid of water? Things like that, right? Do you swim comfortably? Things, right? Just a bunch of different questions. And so you're not only looking at what she answers, but you're also looking at her demeanor. Another thing that I personally like to do, and again, different people have different philosophies about this. So I'm not looking to, you don't have to change anything radically in your teaching just from one conversation here, but certainly something to consider is that I talk about the mechanics of intercourse very early on. For a number of reasons, right? I find that a lot of Kallahs, especially if they are more sheltered and don't have a lot of this information, they're waiting for that class. Okay, so if it's your last class, they're not as tuned in to all of your first classes because is this the class where I'm going to find out what happens to me, right? Like they're waiting for it. So that's one reason. But another reason is I like to see how she responds to this. And sometimes she'll say things like, oh, I know. I'm like, no problem. We're going to review, right? My policy is that everybody gets all the same information. And if it's new to you, great. And if it's a review for you, great, no problem. But I'm paying attention to her reaction. And again, this is more relevant to sexual abuse. But how does she respond to, photographs of anatomy, right? How does she respond to conversations discussing, anatomy, genitalia, et cetera, bodily functions, right? What is her response? So some things that you might see are what we would call dissociating behaviors, meaning it looks like she's completely checked out, right? Whether her eyes are glazed over or she's kind of, she's focusing on you, but like not really, you have this sense. You want to pay attention to the energy. You want to try and, practice getting sensitive to the energy that exists between the two of you, right? And this is something that I firmly believe that people can learn. I know some people say some people are intuitive and some people are not. I believe that we can learn to become sensitive to the energy, right, between us and our student. And certainly when we're teaching in a one-on-one environment, right, I'm speaking only about teaching one-on-one now. If this is something that comes up in a group class, I would approach it a little bit differently. But this is also one of the reasons why I'm a fan of teaching one-on-one. Become sensitive to the energy that exists between the two of you so that you can notice a shift in it, right? You want to kind of develop a certain baseline. This is how she normally is. This is how she normally responds. And then when certain topics come up, right? Now we have a different kind of response, right? And so I'm just noticing that difference. And you want to look again for a certain, a kind of pattern. When does this come up? Right? And does it consistently come up when specific topics come up? Let's say, like we said, the mechanics of intercourse, even bodily functions, right? Like talking about her own menstrual period. It's very common for a woman who has been sexually abused to be incredibly uncomfortable in the normal bodily functions, right? These are things that come up. I've noticed women having strong reactions to, we're going to talk about, again, different, I guess, areas of sensitivity, but strong reactions to things like when we talk about looking at toilet paper or not looking at toilet paper. Again, a strong reaction of like, why would anybody look at their toilet paper, right? If you notice kind of a very strong discomfort in her body, these are things that you might notice. So strong kind of disproportionate reactions or dissociating, right? She either like recoils, she seems like she's checking out. Sometimes, I've had Kallah teachers who told me that their Kallahs have fainted, right? Passed out, right? These are things that are, I see like people who are like the Kallah teachers who are like, oh, how much longer until something like that happens to me, like might never. Okay. And then what do I do? What do I do? And sometimes, again, I had this actually pretty recently, that a Kallah teacher reached out to me, that a Kallah of hers, she was discussing, I think like menstruation. She was talking about Nija, and her Kallah passed out. And she called me up and she's like, what do I do? What do I do? And I said, first, don't assume. There could be a bunch of reasons, right? Like sometimes like we hear a class like this and then like we see it everywhere, you know? So I don't assume anything. I said, right now, like, are you on the phone with me and she's lying on the floor? Because like, help her, you know, like call her mother. Is this something that happens? And she called her mother, and her mother said, oh, yes, she has an extreme aversion to blood. This happened one time before. And like, I said, okay. And then we'll get to the end. We talked about how would she address this in further classes. But the first thing, she called me up and she said, does this mean that because she had come to like a workshop that I put together with a therapist. And I said, we don't know anything. I said, I certainly don't know. I don't have the information. I don't have her history here. But you know, it's information. And then again, you're looking for a kind of pattern of behavior of, you know, how often does this come up? How extreme is it, etc. Okay. The next thing that you might notice in a Kallah who has some history of abuse, and again, I'm moving away now only from sexual abuse to include other types of abuse, is an extreme kind of disorganization, a lack of what we would call like executive function. Let's say she really struggles to show up to her classes on time. She never knows when you actually schedule them. She's always checking in. She's late. She comes in, you know, I don't know what your process for teaching is, but let's say you assume that your students should come with like, you know, a notebook and a pen. She never has a notebook. She never has a pen. She still hasn't bought the book. She still hasn't this. She still, right? Any kind of like homework, let's say that you give her, for example, personally, I have my Kallahs practice their Badikos from pretty early on, again, for a number of reasons. Still hasn't done it, and you notice kind of like a hesitation, but a certain kind of like disorganization, right? That, you know, that can also, again, doesn't mean anything yet, but these are just pieces of information that we're noticing, okay? It's also possible, and this is again, you know, referencing that energy, pay attention to how you feel in her presence. And what I mean by that is, sometimes I will be in the presence of a Kallah and I'll just feel a certain heaviness. I'll feel a certain like, what is wrong with her? Okay. I'm saying it exactly how I feel it, right? Because we're talking to the Kallah teachers here and not the Kallahs, right? But there's a certain feeling of like, she even listening? She even paying attention? Like, I feel frustrated. I feel the limitation of our learning relationship. It just feels like I start feeling insecure. Maybe I'm not a good teacher, right? Because it seems like nothing that I'm teaching her is actually really getting across. You know, she maybe seems very needy in certain areas. Like, pay attention to how you feel in her presence. If you feel depleted, exhausted, unsure when you normally are pretty sure, again, you know your own baseline. This is, again, another thing to keep in mind. Not any one of these things is going to be an issue, but when we put it all together, we might have a certain suspicion, okay? Now, you can kind of divide, in addition to dividing Kallahs, you know, into categories of different types of abuse, we also need to divide in between a Kallah who you know has been abused and a Kallah who you only suspect or don't know has been abused. And I just have to say, you know, I've been teaching, you know, this demographic of Kallahs for quite a while, and not just, you know, a period of time, but also many of them, okay? So there's been a lot of volume. And recently I was asked, not so recently, but, you know, in the last year, I was asked to teach a girl additional classes, meaning she had one Kallah teacher, and then she was coming to me for some extra classes. For whatever reason, that's what her parents wanted. It's actually funny, they called me up and they said, we think that the Kallah teacher that she's learning with is a bit young and inexperienced, so can you learn with her? And I was like, okay. So I did a few extra classes. Recently, I ran into the Kallah teacher who I shared this Kallah with. And we were talking about, you know, different things that come up. We were talking about trauma more broadly. And she said to me, yeah, I think that Kallah who we shared, like, she had experienced trauma, but it wasn't abusive. And I was like, what? I didn't notice anything, right? And I had no information. I had nothing to add to the conversation. So we won't always know. right? Now, when I thought back, I'm like, did I do anything harmful? I think it was fine. I think it was fine because again, I'm always trying to, I always not assume until proven otherwise, but I always have, a certain like sensitivity in the approach, knowing that you don't know. So I don't think anything harmful happens, but also don't assume that just with experience, you're going to kind of develop this like magical sixth sense and you're going to be able to like pick it up everywhere. Right? That's not how it works. If that's how it works, we wouldn't have had, abuse hiding and still have abuse hiding in our community to the degree that it does, right? You might notice something a little bit strange about different people or not. They become very, very good at hiding it. So the fact that you don't know, right, that's to be expected. I remember one of the therapists who I use for supervision still when I started with her, this is going back like 7-8 years ago. And I said to her, I was asking her about triggers, which we'll talk about, right? So I said, okay, so how do I know what my Kallah's triggers are? And she said, you don't. So I said, so what do I do? Do I ask her, like, can you tell me your triggers? She's like, no, that could be very triggering, right? So I'm like, what am I supposed to do here? I feel just totally trapped. So I kind of, and she said, it's not your responsibility to know. That's not your job, right? Like, it's not your job to know all of her triggers. It's not your job. You can't possibly. So, and I remember her telling me, like, you can't know what you don't know. And as terrifying as that was, I'm like, well, if I don't know, how can I do this properly? It was also very reassuring. There is a limit to my responsibility and there is a limit to my capacity, and I can't know what I don't know. I can only work with what's right in front of me. So I just want to, reassure you with all of that also. Okay, so in terms of assessment in the early, rapport building, whether it's the first class or the first couple of classes, like we said, you want to kind of build that relationship with her. You want to develop a certain baseline so you can notice when she's, more reactive than what's normal for her. Again, if you have a very, high-strung, anxious Kallah, so she might appear reactive to everything. That could be temperament, right? That doesn't necessarily mean anything else, right? But you want to create a rapport and a relationship where disclosure is safe, meaning if you know going in that this is a Kallah who has been sexually abused, that's one category. Okay, we're going to talk about how to deal with that. But let's say you don't necessarily know. So you want to build a relationship, a learning environment where disclosure is safe. So some of the things that I like to do are to reference past Kallahs. Again, not details, not saying, oh, so this Kallah that I had 6 months ago who was sexually abused, I'm looking, like, don't do that. Okay, it's weird. She's gonna be like, do you have something in your eye, right? But referencing past Kallahs in the sense like that she's getting the sense that Kallahs in the past have trusted you. They've shared different things with you and you're not breaching their confidentiality by telling her an overly detailed story. But you're saying, sometimes things come up, and you're just kind of creating this atmosphere where disclosure is safe, asking specific questions, right? And I like to ask open-ended questions. Like I'll ask a question and I'll say, like, you don't have to answer now, right? This question doesn't expire. Right? You might not feel comfortable answering now. That's totally fine. We just meant, like, acknowledging the potential discomfort. We hardly know each other. I also probably wouldn't want to tell anybody, who I just met something that personal. So, but if it ever does become relevant, right? And I try and ask broad questions like, is there anything you feel would be helpful for me to know to be able to teach you better? Is there anything about how you learn or your past learning experiences, right? Just like kind of broad questions, like, is there anything that you can tell me that would help me help you? And you totally don't have to answer it today because you might not even necessarily know what I mean by that question. But it could be in 2 classes when something more sensitive comes up, you're like, oh, wait, you should probably know this about me, right? But now the disclosure isn't coming entirely from her. She's responding to a question that you asked, which already signals to her, I am someone you can tell this to, right? And, I am someone who will be able to handle this, right? And even if you can't, by the way, we all have the poker face, so normal. I've heard that like 100 times. And then when she leaves, you run to the phone and you call like, your veteran college teacher and you're like, I hope the poker face held up because I'm so out of my league. We all do that. We all do that. That's okay, right? You don't have to be an expert in the moment to, reassure and validate. I just want to pause and say, if you are the one being disclosed to, it's possible that you are the first, not always, but sometimes it is the first. You are the first person that this Kallah has ever, specifically when it comes to sexual abuse, because it's possible that you are the first person who has ever engaged in a conversation around sexuality with her. So in a way, this is her first opportunity because the questions have never been asked, right? If this happens, you know, and she didn't have those conversation starters with other trusted adults in her life, you might be the first person she is ever sharing this with, okay? So I just, some things that I have learned over the years, you do not need to have the perfect thing to say. You are not going to solve or treat her trauma in one response. What is most important to convey to her, okay, are A, that you believe her. No asking questions, okay? No asking questions because A, you know, she might interpret it as you're kind of like fact checking, right? Like, where did this happen? How old were you? Okay, and that can feel very intrusive. And also the details, I feel like I could say this a million times, the details of the abuse do not matter. She can disclose to you that she has been abused, and she does not need to tell you when, by whom, in what way. And as a Kallah teacher, you don't need that information in order to teach her well. You don't need it, okay? Now, I understand that, you know, as human beings, when we hear something so alarming, right, we have this very human response of like, and I'm not, you know, I think it comes from a bunch of different places. We kind of want to compartmentalize this, right? I think also sometimes when we ask ourselves questions, we do it because it's a way to kind of keep ourselves safe. Oh, it happens in a bungalow colony. I don't go to bungalow colonies. Okay, I'm safe. My kids are safe, right? Like there's this very human need to kind of narrow it, right, and understand it. And we think that if we have knowledge around it, we can somehow rationalize it. You can't. Abuse is horrific. Okay, there's no way that if you are, you know, a healthy, compassionate person, you are ever going to be able to wrap your head around that, right? Because we can't, right? And most importantly, I will say again, you don't need that information in order to teach her the way she needs to be taught, right? So you don't want to invade her privacy. You don't want to shut her down. Asking those specific questions is not going to be helpful. If it ever is relevant, it's possible that you can have a conversation like that with her therapist, with her consent, which we'll talk about collaborating, right? I hope we'll talk about all these things. I'm just looking at the time, right? But please do not ask her questions, detailed, specific questions, okay? So you want to convey to her that you believe her. You want to convey to her that you can be solid in the face of this. You're not going to fall apart. I know you probably feel like you want to throw up, you want to burst into tears, you want a million things, right? You want to be as compassionate as possible, right? But if you feel the urge to, let's say, do something like give her a hug, ask, can I give you a hug? Would you like a hug? That can feel very reassuring to many of us. We would want to be hugged. But remember, this is someone who has just told you that somebody touched her body in a way that she didn't want. So to assume that you can now just touch her however you want, right? It's read the room. You can't do that, but you can ask. And in that way, you're conveying to her that this is your desire. You feel compassion, right? But you're also respectful of whatever she wants. And most of all, you don't have to actually say anything. Because our desire to say things a lot of times comes, you know, from wanting to calm ourselves, right? And reassure ourselves. But I like to think of it like this, you know, if someone has suffered so horrifically in their life, the least I can do is be uncomfortable in the presence of their disclosure. It's like the least I can do, you know? I think of this like when I go to Shiva homes also, right? What do I say with it? Nothing. Just sit there and feel incredibly uncomfortable. And it's the least you can do, right? So sometimes that's kind of the self-talk I use for myself when I feel so uncomfortable. This is the least you can do to experience 15, 20 minutes of discomfort in the face of somebody else's searing pain. It's okay. We can do that. As members of Kallah Style, we can do that, right? So you believe her, right? You can remain strong in the face of it, right? And compassionate. And you can, and if you want to say anything, you can say something like, thank you for telling me that. Thank you for trusting me. This is, in this moment, this is not the time for, and what are we going to do about it? Not now. This is just a moment where we honor the fact that this disclosure has happened and we are that trusted individual, okay? As things kind of, settle, right? Then you can say, does anyone else know? Right? That can kind of be a lead in. I know first thing you want to say is, do you have a therapist? Right? Like, please tell me you have a therapist, right? But that can be a little bit, does anyone else know? And then you say, my therapist, and you're like, right? Or, or my parents, right? And then there's room to kind of like, okay, what happens next? Right? But in that moment, we don't want to, we don't want to jump with a lot of things. I also think another helpful question to ask are questions around, sometimes things come up, a girl will reference like, oh, I have a lot of anxiety around that. And again, we throw around these words, right? But if she ever references anything that has to do with emotional well-being, you can very casually say like, oh, have you ever spoken to anyone like that about that, right? Is that something that you've ever like discussed with a professional? Very nonchalantly and she might say like, no, why should I? Some people do. I have a lot of Kallahs who have, if that's something you want to consider, I'm happy to help you, try and find the right person, right? Or she says, yeah, and you say, oh, like, do you, are you currently in therapy? Have you been in therapy in the past? Like, that's kind of like you're leaded, right? But you're never going to ask someone, so have you ever been abused? Is there any trauma in your background? I mean, especially I think nowadays, I think like 5 years ago, we could have asked a question like, is there any trauma? And we may have gotten like a yes or no. I think nowadays, if you ask someone, is there any trauma? They're like, do we all have traumas? So it's not even a helpful question anymore, where maybe in the past it would have been, even though it would be, like a difficult question. Okay. And just because she discloses does not mean you need all the details. This is also true, by the way, if you get a call, let's say from her mother, from her therapist, before you start teaching to say there is some abuse, you don't need to say, what was it? Okay. You can just say, can you share with me the details that you feel are relevant? Right. And again, like, so you might be a little curious. It's okay. We could be a little curious. Okay. Okay. Okay, I want to jump to some like actual like practical things. Okay. So again, there's going to be a difference between a Kallah who has never disclosed to anybody, or to very few people, has never been in treatment, versus a Kallah who has been in treatment or is currently in treatment. It's going to be very different. So I know that there's a lot of conversation around, if a Kallah discloses, how to make a referral, and that's a really important conversation, how to make a referral. But I think that we also need to acknowledge that not every Kallah is going to seek treatment. You might know. You think, you believe, right, that she needs to be in therapy. You are concerned. You're concerned now for the shidduch. Does her chassan know? These are all very complicated, questions. Again, these are questions that we can kind of try and tease out like over the course of the rest of our learning together. But what is very clear is whether she has a therapist or she doesn't have a therapist, she still needs a Kallah teacher. She still needs a Kallah teacher, right? So her therapist is not going to take over and start being an educator. That's not her role. Everybody talks about like what the role of the Kallah teacher isn't. The role of the therapist isn't to be an educator. So you're not obsolete now. She still needs you. We still need you to step up, okay? Certainly it is appropriate to gently suggest a referral, right? And again, if you are not equipped to make this referral on your own, which, many times we're not, there's a lot of complexity around abuse. My personal recommendation is to refer her to an organization that has case management as part of their referral services, because otherwise that kind of case management role will very likely fall on you. And what I mean by that is, a lot of organizations, I'm sure, Project Sarah, Amudim, different organizations that support, and, in the Sephardic community in Brooklyn, there's Simcha, and in different countries have different organizations. They don't only make a referral and say, oh, here are a few names of a clinician or, a helpful professional. They also provide case management, which means that this person can call up her case manager when there are different things that need to be troubleshooted. Let's say things aren't working out with the therapist. Let's say we're suggesting introducing, another approach. Maybe she needs a different type of therapy in addition to this therapy. Maybe she needs medication, and right? If there is no case management, who do you think she's going to turn to? you, because you're the one who made the initial referral, and you might not be able to handle that. Very likely not. A, because you don't have the information, and B, it requires a tremendous amount of time. So, you know, I think that as college teachers, we can liaise with these organizations, right? And kind of like, you know, make an initial phone call, or, you know, give some context, pave the way for her, but know that it's not just about like making the referral and then moving on. There's a lot more, right, that kind of goes into it, especially if seeking treatment is something that's very new to her. Sometimes she'll say, oh yeah, I know this happened. I was very young. I was in therapy then, but like, I haven't been in ages. Do you think I need to be in therapy now? That's a difficult question to answer. Generally, transitions, big life transitions, can be what we call re-traumatizing, meaning they can bring up some of the prior trauma, and it can feel very much in this moment to the person like they are not either experiencing the same thing all over again, or not necessarily the event, but a lot of the kind of emotional experiences. So I think sometimes when people hear the word re-traumatizing, you think like, oh, what happened then is playing again in the person's mind. Not necessarily, but a lot of the responses, sleeplessness, being on high alert, not being able to eat, or, or the opposite, right? Overeating, sleeping too much, right? A lot of the kind of like responses, what you will feel in your body can feel very similar, even if you don't have like, a videotape playing of the event, right? So that's something that I always like to, psychoeducate about. It's possible that you'll notice some of these things coming up for you again. And if that happens, like, are you comfortable reaching out to the therapist that you worked with in the past? Would you want to start with somebody new? Especially if we have enough time, someone will say, what, it's a good idea. Honestly, again, I've seen this with a lot of Kallahs. It's a good idea to kind of be proactive and to have that support. And if you feel like you don't need it, what did we lose? At least that support is there. You've reached out to her, you've created the connection. And if things get, a little more intense, but it's like, here we are 3 months before the wedding, like, go for a check-in. We don't know, right? We don't know what's going to trigger us until we're in it. Okay, I want to skip a little bit because I want to talk about practical things. That in terms of sexual abuse and emotional abuse, like beyond the disclosure, okay, of things that could be challenging for this Kallah. And I should have left more time for this, but time management is not my forte, but I'm working on it. Okay, when it comes to sexual abuse, things that can be very potentially triggering or upsetting or activating for a Kallah are things like anything that questions her autonomy, her control over her own experience and her personal space. These can be things like asking a Rav a Shaila, okay? I'm not even talking now about bringing him a Badika cloth, okay, which is a separate thing, but just asking the question. So things that you might hear are, someone else is in charge of whether I'm nida or not. Someone else gets to decide, okay? The mikvah attendant also, right? Checking certainly can sometimes be something that's very activating, but even the presence of the mikvah attendant, why does she need to be there, right? And sometimes you'll see a strong reaction like this because she's just a very, independent-minded person, or she's a more inhibited person, and that makes her uncomfortable. But sometimes it can really be an indication of something else. Like, so anything that points to, her autonomy being questioned. I'm not in charge of me, because remember, the abuse made her feel powerless. So as much as we can, we want to give her some of that power back. Some of the things I like to do are to give her 2 choices of when she wants, do you want to come at this time, or do you want to come at this time? Right? Even if it's fabricated, right? And she's like, oh, no, that's it, right? Versus telling her, come at Tuesday at 10 a.m., right? She might feel very resistant to being dictated to in that way. And by giving her a choice, do you want to sit here or do you want to sit there? Right? Do you want to learn about this topic today, or do you want to learn about this topic today? I know it sounds childish, like this is how we coerce little children into doing things, right? But the truth is that when we do that with little kids, we're not actually trying to coerce them. We are actually trying to help them feel autonomous, which not only allows them to cooperate with us, right? It actually makes them feel connected to us and secure with us, right? So we're trying to do the same thing here, right? Giving her as much choice as possible, but know that these might be, very topics that she has a very strong reaction to. And it's not necessarily your job to make her okay with all of them. right? At a certain point, hopefully if she has a therapist, we can say something like, this kind of resistance to asking shilos is totally normal. You've gone through, the halachic parameters of it and the hashkafa, etc. And like, is this something that you'd want to bring up with your therapist? Like sometimes, again, you're not telling her what to do, but you're making a suggestion, if this is something that, we recognize that, and again, you've talked about all of the different ways to ask a shayla, and some of them might feel more comfortable to her. This Rav, I'll give you the name of a Rav who texts, or this, or an anonymous drop-off, or whatever it is. But often it's the whole concept that she's struggling with, right? And that's something that might need to be more like emotionally processed, right? Because she feels dictated to. The actual sensation of making a bedika. Okay, I'm going to be explicit, but if a Kallah has been molested, right, or has been touched in an unwanted way in the genital area, and then you are telling her that she needs to insert a finger into her vaginal canal, that can make her head explode. Okay, which is again another reason why practicing earlier can be helpful. Certainly shilos to ask around this are minimizing the number of bedikos. Some women are actually more comfortable. I know this sounds counterintuitive. Some women are actually more comfortable not doing it to themselves, but having a bodekes make the bedikos for them. It's like, you would think like, what do you mean? And others are not. Others say, absolutely not. Nobody else is touching me. I'm only doing it to myself, but I can't even bring myself to do it to myself. And that's something that has to be worked through like very, very slowly, step by step. So the more time you have, the better off it'll be. And hopefully, again, best case scenario, you are working in tandem with your therapist, right? To kind of, the right language. And to mention language, some language can be very alarming. I know that sometimes we like to use pretty like technical, mechanical language. It feels safer, but words like insert, words like penetration, these can be very activating for someone who has been sexually abused. You can use, let's say you're trying to teach her how to make a bedika, you can say something like gently work a finger, into the vaginal opening, right? Pay attention to your tone, pay attention to your demeanor, right? Words like gentle, soft, slow, these are all things that are going to kind of like slow her down. And there are, creative ways. I'm actually working on kind of like a dictionary almost of like, of what alternative ways of saying things that might be, that might be difficult. And again, technical words like penetration, intercourse, these are words that might be activating for her, and you're going to want to potentially use other ones. Chafifa for mikvah and tevila itself. So interestingly, many women who have been sexually abused are extremely uncomfortable in their own bodies, and specifically in states of undress. I have had Kallahs who took 10-second showers with the lights off. The idea of sitting in a bath, the idea of being undressed for an extended period of time, the idea of looking at their own body was extremely difficult to them. Some solutions that we came up with obviously are that a bath is not ma'akev. You must have a Rav who is trauma informed, sexually abuse informed to answer these shilos. So if you call up a Rav and say, I have a Kallah who doesn't really want to take a bath, does she have to? Right? You might get an answer like, what do you mean? Encourage her to take a bath, right? Versus like, no, there's a very real reason here, and this is normal. So that's, one solution is, again, that she does not have to spend a lot of time in the shower. Even though we talk about a thorough shower, she can prepare parts of her body at a time. Meaning, she can kind of, run a bath and be wearing a robe and take care of like her feet and her legs, right, in the bathtub. Then she can kind of do her upper body. She can do like pieces of her body at a time. She does not, even though really, ideally when she's rinsing her whole body thoroughly. Sometimes that's just not possible for a woman like that. And same thing with checking herself. She can check parts of her body at a time. She does not need to stand in front of a mirror completely undressed and check herself. Just because that may be the most efficient way to do it for a woman who has not experienced sexual abuse doesn't mean that this woman has to do it that way. She can do it in pieces. Practically when talking about, the wedding and the relationship, the yichud room, I've had Kallahs who had panic attacks when they heard that door lock. Okay. Again, this is very challenging, depending on whether her chassan knows or doesn't know. Not getting into that, that's a whole other topic, right? So there are ways to kind of prepare her. The door of the yichud room is locked. And I've had this with girls, at the request and suggestion of their therapist, we've actually practiced with getting used, desensitizing ourselves to the sound of a door being locked. What are some things that are going to help her stay grounded in that moment, right? So that she doesn't totally, lose herself. But just the idea of being alone with somebody. Sometimes her abuser is at the wedding. If it's a family member, this can be horrific, okay? And something that she might bring up with you and something that you should be aware of. Actual sexual intimacy, obviously. Now, this can be really challenging because we don't actually know, she doesn't know what is going to be triggering for her and what is not. Because unlike some of the other things that we've talked about, she very likely, although again, depending on, the Kallah, and there's a wide range here, it's very possible that she has not experienced this since the sexual abuse. So it's not the same thing that we can practice like a badika, right? We don't actually know what's going to be triggering to her. Some things like watching a man undress, right? That can be very triggering, even if there's no physical touch here, but it's just her perspective. I remember I once had a Kallah who told me, she needed her chassan to be in the bed first, because the idea of, a man in a state of partial undress approaching her while she is in her bed, she knew that was not going to work. So good, we know that. So now we're gonna switch things around. That's not going to be the script, right? The other thing that different types of touch obviously can be re-traumatizing or triggering. It's also possible that because our what we find arousing is rooted in our initial sexual experiences, and that kind of neurons that fire together, wire together. So if the first time she experienced arousal, right, even if she didn't know what it was and she didn't have the language for it, was at the time of the abuse, and now certain things can be linked, right? Both in that arousal might be traumatizing to her, but also in that what she needs to become aroused might be rooted in some abusive behaviors, and that can get very complicated. But again, as a Kallah teacher, it's helpful for you to be aware of this, but you are not the one who's going to rewire her brain. Okay, and in the last 2 minutes, I want to talk about emotional abuse. I know we didn't talk about it enough at all, but a young woman who has grown up in an environment that was emotionally abusive will very often struggle with her self-concept. Okay, she's not really sure who she is. She's not really sure what her feelings are, right? If you ask her to tell me about yourself, right? She's like, I don't have anything. I don't know. I don't know how to tell you who I am, right? Again, a lot of 19-year-olds can't tell you who they are. So this isn't a diagnostic tool, but this is something to kind of be aware of. If she has, a lot of attachment wounds, we're not doing a whole class on attachment now, but, very, very briefly, the way we formed attachments with our primary caregivers in infancy and childhood will very often play out in our adult intimate relationships. So if that was compromised, and we're talking specifically now about abuse, we're not talking about attachment issues, which we can kind of put into that other category of, somewhat, dysfunctional, right? Or, she didn't have all of her needs met. That's not the same thing as abuse. But, again, abuse is this pattern of control, and there's fear, right? So if there was emotional abuse there, then needs that in general can be very activating and re-traumatizing to her, because it can feel like abandonment. Okay, so if there are strong attachment wounds, the whole concept of, right, and you might hear her say things like, my husband's gonna leave me, and you're like, he's not moving out, right? What? But it can feel, or you might hear her express a lot of dismay and a lot of resistance to this whole idea of something being inaccessible. Again, remember, if halacha is coming and saying this kind of connection is inaccessible, it's like, you're going to tell me how to be in a relationship. You might pick up on some of that also. The whole concept, the whole experience of emotional intimacy, being vulnerable with another person, right? So let's say, she brings something up with you and you say something like, oh, did you bring that up with your chassan? And she's like, I can tell him that. And you're like, you're going to marry him. You can tell him something, again, within, being culturally competent, across the board, unless a couple is not seeing each other at all throughout engagement, they are building an emotional connection throughout their engagement, right? So, in a way that's culturally competent, kind of like, picking up on, like, is that something that you can share with your chassid? Just how you feel about something. That can feel like climbing Mount Everest. Impossible. I can't tell another person how I feel, being vulnerable. Becoming nida from having intercourse for the first time, becoming nida from Bia Rishona. This can also be can feel like an abandonment. It can feel like so heavy. It can feel impossible because it's this experience of intent, what she experiences as intense closeness, right? And then separation, right? And if you explain to her, but no, emotionally, you're still close, that's not a concept that she can likely really understand because she hasn't experienced safe emotional closeness, okay? Can I get 5 more minutes? Yeah, okay, fine. I just want to talk practically about some tools, even though we wove some of them in. So the first one I mentioned, being mindful of the learning environment, which includes your relationship with her, okay? But it also includes, just the general physical environment. I'm a big believer in, we don't need to do like, a whole spring cleaning every time a Kallah comes, okay? There's a pair of shoes in the front hall. This is real life. I'm a real person. And I actually think that, I'm not saying that your house should be like a tornado and you're just like, careful, step over that thing, like we could tidy up a little bit, but very often, many of us are teaching Kallahs in our own home, and it's okay. They can see us as a human being within reason, okay? But also bear in mind that if a Kallah has experienced trauma, she likely, and specifically, again, we're talking about abuse here, but this does apply to all trauma, she likely will have to use a lot of energy to focus. So anything that you can do to make that easier for her. Some things that I've noticed over the years are that mirrors in a room can be very difficult. Again, I'm not saying you have to like redecorate your house, but she can sit with her back to a mirror so she's not constantly catching her eye. I remember I once had this mirrored vase on my dining room table, and I noticed that this Kallah like kept, and I'm like, okay, move the vase, right? Things that can be distracting to her. I like to put out specifically, I'll always offer a Kallah, do you want something to drink? Do you want something? But like, if she's not bringing her own, she might actually need that, just a physical environment of that's, safe and secure and calm and not distracting. It's also helpful for a Kallah like this to change up the learning environment, specifically to learn outside and to learn shoulder to shoulder. I know we're often sitting across from our Kallahs or somehow facing each other, but especially when we're talking about, topics that could be especially sensitive or, impact her in a strong way, it kind of helps her. It's almost like, how when you're walking down the aisle, you're like very grateful to have that veil because people don't have to they're not scrutinizing your face. You feel like you have a little bit of privacy. We can do the same thing. We can give her a little bit of privacy as she's processing a lot of things, and she doesn't have to be mindful of how her face appears to us, right? Again, you're kind of watching out of the corner of your eye because you want to assess a response, but learning shoulder to shoulder will also often help her open up a little bit more. Ever had that experience where you're driving in the car with one of your children and all of a sudden they just start, you're like, right, you're baking. This is actually a really rooted in experiential learning theory, right? That when you're side by side and you're engaged in another activity. I've taken walks with Kallahs around my neighborhood. So the shoulder to shoulder can be very helpful, and specifically the outdoors. Remember, less so with emotional abuse, although usually emotional abuse did happen, let's say, in the confines of a home, potentially. Sexual abuse almost always occurs in an enclosed space, okay? So by learning outdoors, you're giving her a lot of air and a broader wingspan, and it feels entirely different than a previous experience. Keeping language and tone neutral, we talked a little bit about that, but I know we like to get very dramatic and exciting in how we teach, but often for a Kallah who's experienced abuse, that can be startling, right? So we want to be mindful of keeping our tone, neutral and calm. The way we respond to questions, there's no such thing as a stupid question, right? Using language that is empowering and puts her in a position of control. So specifically when we're teaching about sexual intimacy, we really want to emphasize that this is not anything that happens to another person, but there are two active participants who are experiencing something together. This is a message that every Kallah needs to hear very strongly, but specifically a Kallah who has experienced abuse might really be assuming something different, okay? Because her experience has been something different. Another very, this will be the last kind of helpful thing, a very helpful tool that I have found, especially once, you know, the disclosure has been made, you've collaborated with your therapist. I feel bad we didn't really have a chance to flesh that out so much, how to collaborate with a professional. But I find it very helpful to determine together with the Kallah a nonverbal cue that she can use to signal to me when things are too much. Okay, whether that's, you know, lifting a finger or, you know, something, right? Something that will be noticeable to you, because the last thing you want is she's like, right? And you're like, you're not catching it. Something that's very noticeable to you, but is not a verbal cue. If you say something to her, like, tell me when it's too much, if she's flooded, meaning that emotionally she's like, think about a flood. What is a flood? It's like there's way too much here and it's spilling over. So she likely in that moment does not have the capacity to say, excuse me, it's too much, right? So think about it. It's like if you're at the dentist and he's like, tell me if it hurts. Well, thanks. I have 6 hands in my mouth. I can't tell you anything, right? So it's similar, right? So what will the dentist often say? Pick up a hand, and then they'll like put down your hand and ignore you and they're almost done. And you're like, hey, right? So if you tell her this is the cue, respond to it. Even if something, I've had that sometimes, like, you know, where, and I was like, and they're like, no, I was just stretching. I'm like, okay, I just want to be sure. Right. You know, and then I like to have in my head just like a handful of different topics that'll just like immediately seg into something else, you know, so we can be talking about something, you know, very explicit and very sensitive. She picks up a finger and I'm like, so communication. It's really, you know, we want to use I statements, and, you know, I'll just like go immediately into something different. That I kind of like to keep at my fingertips so that it's not that awkward, right? Because then the next time she feels flooded, she doesn't feel like, oh no, my awkwardness is making my teacher feel awkward. I'm making her job harder, because that's another thing, especially around emotional abuse. There might be a really strong need to please other people and to keep other people comfortable, right? So if she sees any discomfort on my end, she's going to be like, okay, you know, I can't put that on her to make me too uncomfortable if she's uncomfortable, right? So you want to kind of have, let's say, 2 or 3 topics at your fingertips that if you do get that cue, you can immediately launch into them with, like, you know, only the briefest pause, right? Or you can just get up and, you know, you're like, hold on 1 second. Actually, I'm just running a tissue. I need a drink. I need something. Give her time alone. She can know that she can step out whenever she wants. Right. So all of those things can kind of, you know, can be helpful. And I think the most important thing is that it is crucial to have supervision from clinicians, peer supervision from other college teachers, a very, you know, knowledgeable, competent RUV in this area. But again, I'm going to say again, supervision from clinicians. I know that, you know, again, like I said, hopefully there are some initiatives coming out soon that will really help college teachers serve this demographic even better. But you just cannot compare having that hand holding of, you know, okay, I'm about to teach this class. What are some things that I can, you know, how should I start? How should I frame this? What should I look out for? How should I respond? You know, and then to have that supervision of this is what happens, right? It really is crucial. And if anybody wants, I'll just give one book recommendation. I have a bunch, but one book recommendation that I found incredibly helpful, specifically around sexual abuse, in understanding my Kallahs who have experienced sexual abuse, and understanding what their transition into a hopefully healthy sexual relationship will look like. And it's called The Sexual Healing Journey. By Wendy Maltz. I don't know how you pronounce her last name, M-A-L-T-Z. It's incredible. It is written for the survivor of sexual abuse who now wants to experience a healthy sexual relationship. But I personally found reading it, I reference it a lot. Yes. Oh, can you hold it up again? That one, that's a good one. I think they're up to the 3rd edition now, but really all of the editions are, I keep buying them just because I'm like that. But you know, they're all pretty similar with some tweaks. And I found it incredibly helpful in understanding, learning, trying to understand, because of course I can't fully understand the experience of the Kallah, how things are going to land on her, some of the things that she's going to have to contend with, and I reference it often. Okay, thank you so much for your patience and your listening. I appreciate it. And I am available by email if people have specific, questions that they want to reach out about.
Thank you so much, Chevy. And it's totally fine. I think we're all in agreement that you went over. Really appreciate
Oh, I see the message now. Sorry.
No problem. I'm really glad that you were able to share all that with us. Very insightful. And we actually got some requests. You mentioned book recommendations, and there were a bunch of requests for that. So if you could share that with us, we're happy to send that out.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
So I'm glad that Kallah was also able to share the Healing Journey book. And another thing I wanted to bring up is you mentioned making referrals. You shared that a bunch of times, and I just wanted to remind everyone, Project Sarah does have case management services as well as therapy services for those who live in New Jersey. And we're absolutely here to collaborate when needed. You also touched upon, Chevy, the environment. We have creating an environment where a individual, someone you're working with, is able to come forward and give and share, or ask for help, or make a disclosure. We do have contact cards to put by Mikvahs and posters, which we can send out and you can use where appropriate. So feel free to be in touch with us about that. We have also been getting some requests about showing our resources video again for those who missed it at the beginning of the event. So what we'll do is we'll take a 2-minute break and we'll show the video for those who want to see it again. It's a very short video clip. And during this time, whoever needs to get up for a minute, feel free to do that. But also, it would be a great time to think of questions that you might want to address to either Chevy or Aliza, because Chevy will also be joining that Q&A panel. And monitoring the panel is Kallah Weldler, who was the one who shared the book. She is one of our Project Sarah therapists who also did an incredible job coordinating today's event. Thank you so much, Kallah. It was just really, really, really great job. Really appreciative of all the work you put into this event. And so why don't we go ahead and pull up the video again. And for anybody who needs to take a 2-minute break, now would be a great time.
Where a holy house once stood, a fox roams in its place. In ruins the mount forsaken, sacred stones disgraced. In pain the sages cry, as Uriah's words ring true, and echo through the night. Woe unto the Jews! Akiva, don't you see? We're faced with tragedy, but still it seems that you deny with laughter and with glee. No, my son, he's answering, half the promise now fulfilled, and soon he will rebuild, only stronger, and the city streets will fill. And once more will children play, as prophecies unravel, and tomorrow starts today. So take comfort in these words, let the tears dry from your eyes, for one day we'll see our Mikvah. One day these walls will rise, and the city streets will fill. When the old remain forever young, and the tyrant's words shine as the sun, and the lion lays in peace aside the lamb, he'll bring us home on eagle's wings, as once again live and sing to a nation now rejoin, only stronger, and the city streets will fill. And once more will children play, as prophecies unravel, and tomorrow starts today. So take comfort in these dry from your eyes. For one day we'll see our Mikvah. One day these walls will rise. And the city streets will rechayvais ha'ir yimalu. Yeladim v'yeladas misachakim. Urechayvais ha'ir yimalu. Yeladim v'yeladas misachakim. And the city streets will fill, and what's more will children play as prophecy.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope that that video was informative for all of you and that you enjoyed the little break. And I wanted to say thank you again to both Aliza and Chevy for the phenomenal presentations. And I'm sure that all of you listening in, your mind is probably spinning as much as mine is. It's like all these questions and thoughts and comments that you want to share. And with that, I really want to open the stage for all of you to cash in on this moment, to be able to ask live questions to both Aliza and to Chevy. I'm going to have them join me here. If you see on the bottom right of your screen, there's a reactions tab. And if you click on that, there is an option for you to raise your hand. So if you have any thoughts and comments, please feel free to raise your hand now and we'll call on you and you'll get a chance to ask Aliza, both Aliza and Chevy live questions now. We also have some questions that came in before the event that I'll be happy to share, but I want to first give everyone a chance who came now to be able to ask your questions. I know we got some questions in the chat throughout the event. So again, feel free, there's a reactions tab on the bottom right of your screen. You can raise your hand. Okay, great, Yadis, I see our first question coming in. You can feel free to unmute.
Sorry about that. Hi. It's, I guess, maybe more for Chevy, but whoever. Hi, Aliza. Chevy, you mentioned something about not telling, if the husband doesn't know, how can she get married and have a healthy marriage? How can you expect to have a healthy marriage if she doesn't, is not honest with her husband, and B, if he doesn't know to be sensitive to these issues?
Yeah. Okay, so.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Go ahead.
I'm gonna tread lightly in this response because obviously this varies from community to community, but it has become the practice in certain communities that the advice given to, this applies to both Chassan and Kallah, men and women who have been abused, to only disclose abuse after marriage. Now, again, I am not I guess I'm entitled to an opinion, but I don't feel that it's my place to publicly comment on what is a psak. What I will say is that I think that sometimes people will get that psak and there's a lot of nuance around it. So meaning, yeah, if you call somebody and you say, do I have to say, okay? Again, the parameters, as I understand them from speaking to different gedolim who I don't have, I should have asked them if I can quote beforehand, but since I don't, I'll keep it vague, is that it's not a requirement. At the same time, what I have been experiencing more and more pretty often is, different Rabbanim have asked me to have conversations with Kallahs about this for a couple of reasons. Number one, because these Rabbanim feel like they want to be reassured that, let's say, treatment has been pursued and progress is being made, and this Kallah really is in a position with, yes, the right resources and support and sensitivity, meaning we've really worked through a lot of those I'm not her therapist, but she has worked through a lot of those trauma responses and she is able to get married in order to feel comfortable with that psak. What the psak is based on essentially is that until there is an established emotional bond, right? Most people don't feel safe enough to disclose and being able to receive a disclosure like that might be compromised. So that is what the psak is based on, and it's not wrong theoretically. At the same time, my personal belief is that there are ways to navigate that conversation before marriage. Whether before engagement or not can also be tricky because, you know, it depends on the community and how quickly people are getting engaged and how, you know, how much trust and emotional safety has really been built. When I do talk to Kallah, this isn't totally answering your question, but I'm going to springboard if it's okay. We talk a lot about, you know, how to make these disclosures. It's often really helpful to have, you know, for this to be done in somewhat of a group, in the presence of a Rav, in the presence of a therapist, so that reactions can kind of be moderated. Sometimes it's helpful for, you know, the chassan or the Kallah, whoever's being, you know, on the receiving end of the disclosure, to have a certain amount of prep. Sometimes it's possible to disclose partially, meaning, so what I find most common now is that, you know, the chassan or the Kallah knows that there is something and that they will receive more details afterwards, and often they're reassured either by a Rav or a therapist that while this is a big deal, it's not something that long-term compromises this person's ability to be a wonderful spouse and parent. You know, so there's kind of a lot of moving parts to it, but, you know, broadly, I on the one hand, I agree that this is something huge, and on the other hand, I understand how with, you know, the current system, especially, you know, in the more yeshivish, Haredi, Hasidish, you know, communities, to force someone to make a disclosure like this when the relationship is not established is a very big ask. So we're really caught between a rock and a hard place.
I'd like to add in also just the thought of what's a healthy marriage, meaning marriages have stuff, all of them, and they're all complicated. And part of getting married is signing up for being with another person in their stuff and bringing them forward and allowing them to bring you forward. So I would hope, and again, it's not something we're doing a good job on right now as a society. We have early divorces, and for a reason, because people are not prepared to say, I mean, we're not Catholic. We don't say till death do us part, but we should be Jewish and say, we're in this together. And it's our project together to build this Bayit Ne'aman, which takes building every single day, every single choice. And we're going to do it together, even through the hard stuff. That being said, I actually think about sometimes, you know, it's sort of the opposite of the sota, where the woman drinks the water and the man also dies from it because they're connected. In a way, when the one partner is abused, whether in the yeshiva dorms or at camp or whatever it is, so is their partner far away at that same moment. They've both just been abused because their marriage is now affected by it. I wouldn't say compromised necessarily, but it's affected. At the same time, they've both been affected in that moment. So it is something to know about, and to just, the disclosure is there's an extra piece to walk forward with me about, and it's going to be ours. So that's the consciousness that hopefully we can create with our children, is that we're all walking with somebody into the unknown, but what's known is that it's going to be hard and great and hard and hopefully great.
And, you know, Elisa, that's actually an idea that when I share that with Kallahs who have experienced abuse or even more broadly trauma, I find that this actually comes up very often when a woman comes to me, meaning if she wasn't my Kallah and she, you know, is being sent to me for kind of like a refresher, she didn't really have the sensitive Kallah classes that she needed. And now she's coming, you know, like she's had a nice amount of therapy and she's coming kind of for, you know, somewhat of a hashkafa or sexual education kind of refresher. And when I share this idea with her, right, there can often be a lot of shame, certainly, and guilt. You know, I like, how can I bring another person into this, or how could I have brought him into this, or all of the ways that I feel I personally am limited. I'm by extension limiting in the relationship, and it's not fair to him. And sharing this idea of there's no such thing as my stuff and your stuff. Once we're married, it's our stuff, right? And really kind of even going into, you know, more Kabbalistic ideas about the union of neshamos, they find that incredibly reassuring, right? And soothing. and it gives them a lot of hope, right? Now, we also know that if someone feels duped, right, and entering a relationship, that's huge. That's a very big consideration, and that's not something we can ignore. But I also think that because we're having this conversation kind of from the perspective of, teaching the Kallahs who have been abused, if there's a Kallah who says, I can't tell my chassan, right, I think we also need to have a lot of compassion for why that is. Right, and recognize that in our current system of how much trust and safety there is between a couple before marriage, I just heard Rabbi Ari Sittner say that like we build the house upside down very often in our community. Usually people get to know each other and then they form an attachment and then they commit, right?
Yeah.
And we're often committing before. So that's something that we need to be cognizant of and realize that, it's easy to kind of say something like, how could she trick him? But to make that disclosure is a very, very big ask.
The success of this book.
As a host, you can mute somebody.
Yes, I was just gonna try to find who it is. Reminded everybody to please keep yourself muted.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I see we have some more questions coming in. Thank you both. Okay, let's start over here with Mrs. Marmerstein in other circles known as Mommy. Go on, what's your question that you have? Wait 1 second, you just need to unmute. There we go.
Thank you so much, Kallah, my lovely daughter-in-law, who I'm so proud of. I work for Relief here in Toronto as a referral specialist and some other stuff, but I really just have a comment to make. All of us come into a person's life in the middle of their story. And when you come in the middle of a story, you have just your part that you're going to be addressing, that you're going to be affecting, and being cognizant of what your role is, as Chevy mentioned and as Aliza mentioned, just knowing what your role is very important, and having that defined and having your parameters clearly defined is a very important piece for everybody in their own role to keep in mind. And because of that, knowing what your role is also allows you not to get too, you always feel like you want to fix the whole thing, but you can't. And so knowing what your part is and knowing that there are limitations can keep you positive, can keep you working well within your role, even if you can't fix the whole thing.
Yeah. Can I say something on that? Because it's such an important point. I think that, what I hear very often is, a comment along the lines of like, okay, so, I have this Kallah, she's been, let's say it's abuse, right, in this case. But, if she has a therapist or if she's willing to, that's great. But, what I'll often hear is, but she's not, right? And my response is always, but that doesn't mean that your role expands. Meaning, yes, it would be amazing if you can work, in tandem with another professional. But even if you're the only one, that doesn't mean that now you can do more or you should do more than you can do, right? You're not like eating for two here. You know what I'm saying? You're not working for two. Right? You still can only do what you can do. So even if there is not another therapist, organization, professional involved, that still doesn't mean that you are anything other. You can be a really invested Kallah teacher. You can hold her hand. Maybe it will take more time or energy than typical, but that doesn't mean that you start reading, how to rewire a brain book. No, you can read it, but don't use it like practically,
yes.
skill-wise.
Right. Yes. I have a response when people call me about that, and it's pray and release. Like you've come to the end and now it's daven. Don't let go. Daven. No. But no. You can't fix it. You have to give it back to the one who can, and hopefully Hashem will guide them to wherever they need to go. But you daven and release, because it's not your job.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
can I say one more thing? I think also, because Elisa just reminded me of this, I think also that remembering how, you know, how much autonomy, right, and self-narration really means to a survivor of abuse, right? So I think that we need to remember that when we take their disclosure and we say, okay, no problem, I'll hold on to this for you, I'll fix it for you, or right, we are actually really robbing them of something that they need so desperately, which is ownership over their own story. So we also need to be mindful, right, of that piece of it, right? They might be coming to us for advice, but that doesn't mean that advice is actually what they need, right? They're coming to us with a question, but we really need to respond with support, right? So just something also to keep in mind. Thank you so much for bringing that up. It's important.
Thank you. It's been really informative and inspiring.
Okay, I see we have another hand raised or trying to be, oh, there we go. Perfect. Yes, come on, Anyal.
Hi, thank you so much. I only see a thumbs up, that's why I put that. But I was wondering if you could, I had to step out a little bit before, so I'm not sure if I missed it, but if you could address what, even for if we don't know, or if, you know, there is no history of abuse for Kallahs, what to just say in general. Like, I think that every woman going into a marriage should know, you know, maybe like there's just some, I know Project Sarah has like sheets of, you know, signs of abuse and what to look out for, but just to spread the knowledge, you know, of the red flags.
Mm-hmm. So specifically what to look out for in terms of red flags, even if you don't know if there has been abuse, or are you asking me about messaging to give to every Kallah regardless?
The latter, more
Okay.
the latter, like, you know,
Okay.
just in general, like
Okay.
what to
Okay.
kind of.
Yeah. I think it's really, really important that, okay, I hope I don't get like attacked for saying this. Just to be clear, I am a proud Beis Yaakov graduate, okay? Proud. Out of town Beis Yaakov, right? At the same time, I don't know, and I teach in a Beis Yaakov in town, but I don't know that our system does the greatest job of developing a young woman's intuition. And I think that one of the biggest gifts that we can give her is permission to trust her instincts, right? Because many women will say to you, and I guess this applies a little bit more like, you know, to things that can come up after marriage, but not always. You would be surprised sometimes, you know, Kallahs will say things to me, they'll describe an event and they'll say, was that abuse? They'll describe something that happened when they were 6 years old, 12 years old, whatever. Was that abuse, right? And my first, before, sometimes in my head, I'm going, yes, yeah, hello, right? But what I respond with is, what do you think? How did it feel? You're remembering this now, right? Like, how did it feel? And again, tread lightly, because you're not a therapist here. You don't want to open up something that you can't contain. That's very, very dangerous, right? But you're giving her a tremendous gift when you turn the question back and you say, well, how did it feel to you? Did it feel problematic? Is it still impacting you today, right? Or like, you know, if a Kallah calls me afterwards and she describes behaviors or patterns, you know, in her marriage now, and she'll say, is this abusive, right? We can have that conversation, but let's not rush there. Let's first have the conversation of, how does it feel to you? Do you feel safe? Do you, right? Because somebody else could be in this situation and feel totally fine, but you clearly don't, right? And I think that intuition, that self-knowledge, that like, this is what is safe to tolerate for me and this is what isn't, if we can turn up the volume on that in our Kallahs, we will be giving them a tremendous gift that will last them way beyond their Kallah classes. And preferably if we can start before. Those of us who are high school teachers, these are things that we want to start before also. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, I see we're still getting some questions in the chat. If you're able to raise your hand and ask the question live, that would be amazing. One question that I'm thinking of now until someone else raises their hand is that in my role as a therapist at Project Sarah, I also run a group called the Healing Circle, which is, as some of you may have seen in the slides, it's a group for survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And a question that came up to me within this group was from a woman who had never been married. And the question was, and I know Chevy had alluded to this earlier, about how we fit the Kallah classes into such a short amount of time. And what would the ideal time frame be? From this woman who had never been married and asked, is it okay for me to take Kallah classes now, before I start dating seriously, before I learn more? And my answer was yes. And I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on that.
I'm going to let Elisa go first.
I'm just going to start with, I love the fact that Chevy has pre-Kallah classes and how important that is. And I have done work with quite a few of our core MMCs. We have this training program for MMCs, Mashpia mentor counselors in the community. And some of them have done projects with older singles to pre-teach, because especially as you're 28, 26, 28, 32, not married. So everybody, all your friends, sisters, whatever, they all know about all this stuff you never really heard about because you didn't get taught it. So can you learn it in advance? Yes, it can be very reassuring. We've asked Shiloh's about it. Yes, the answer is yes. And it can be very reassuring to understand what is going on, even before you're engaged, even before you're thinking of getting engaged. So, and Chevy happens to be one of the experts, rising experts in the field. So I will now pass it to her for that.
Elisa is very kind and supportive. I think I don't know if she hires herself out as a cheerleader, but I'm very zocha to have her as one of mine, and we reciprocate. So yes, so this notion of pre-Kallah classes, and again, we call it that just for lack of a better term, but I think, sometimes in certain communities that's like alarming. You don't teach Kallah classes, somebody who's not a Kallah. Okay, so premarital education, whatever you want to call it. It actually was an outgrowth of therapists sending me their clients who wanted Kallah classes before they were Kallahs because they wanted to prepare. I currently do not have a ton of time for it. If there is any Kallah teacher who would like to, I don't know, sit with me for a few hours and I'll give it over. And this is something that you can bring to your community. Like Elisa said, I've asked many Shilohs about this. And the answer that I received was, if she's old enough to get married, then she is old enough to have this information. It is not a secret. And, with certain parameters, it should still kind of preferably stay in that one-on-one learning environment, where we're maintaining, like SNEAs around it, whatever. But there's absolutely no reason why not. I have found that most women like to have, kind of a broad view of the halachic structure, even without details, which is fine. And then, a lot of hashkafa and a lot of sexual education and kind of the Torah approach to the sexual relationship, etc. That can be incredibly, incredibly impactful. And I always say, educators are not therapists, but learning can be very healing. Very healing. And it can sometimes be a missing piece in someone's healing journey, right? Because a lot of the information out there that's catered toward, survivors of sexual abuse doesn't always fit perfectly into a Torah framework, right? So it can be, and it can really, really impact a woman's ability to date in a healthy way and to look forward to marriage and engagement versus seeing it as this, dreaded, looming, sometimes that information can be really, really, really healing. So I think it's a fantastic idea. I think that we need more of it, definitely. And I should say also that it's not only, I would say most of the women who have come to me for pre-Kallah classes do fall into an abuse survivor category, but not always. Like Elisa said, over COVID especially, there were so many women who felt that they had extra time on their hands, and they said, I'm 30 years old, like this is crazy, like I want to know what this is, and they just kind of treated themselves to these classes, and so it can really be very, very helpful to a lot of people, and like I said, again, if someone wants to learn how to do this, I think you can probably develop your own curriculum, but I'm happy to share.
Amazing, thank you. Okay, I know we still have some time, but before I jump in with my next question, if anybody else still has a question, you can feel free using the reactions tab on the bottom right to raise your hand, and we'll have you join us here. Okay, I know some of the questions that came in beforehand. I see that we got some questions, just switching tracks for a little bit more directly related to Mikvah, about how a Mikvah attendant can help, what they can do. We only have a couple minutes with the woman. What happens if you see a woman coming in and you notice that she has some bruises, what to say, what not to say? How can you be, what is your role over there in helping this woman?
Great. Okay, so I'll work on that, and I'm sure Chevy can add in. So that's why I gave the whole class that I gave, is that to understand we are the facilitators of an amazing experience. and not for everyone is it amazing. So we want to have our antennas up for that. We notice things, but we want to make sure that on a regular basis, we're available so that a disclosure can happen. So to not be ushering somebody quickly through the process. So there's a room in the mikvah because we have a schedule and whatever it is, but to actually pause to create that space in which another could have a conversation or a connection or reach out. And I think putting the cards around and things like that to allow for disclosure, we certainly don't want to intrude on their space. It's enough that we're intruding that we see them unclothed. Then people can feel very vulnerable about that. So to feel even more vulnerable, maybe she's going to notice, maybe she's going to say something, maybe I don't want to go because she might say. So we want to make ourselves as available as possible and use language that creates availability in addition to putting out other things so that the availability doesn't have to be face-to-face. The disclosure doesn't have to be face-to-face. Some people can't disclose face-to-face. So I don't know if you ever get those cards with a box checked off. I saw your cards on there. Is it checked off or is it just to give somebody the capacity to say something? Or could they hand you the card as they leave? And that might be the disclosure. So that I'll let you finish in on how to or add into how to disclose in the mikvah. But from the mikvah attendant's perspective, it's to keep it open so that there's the possibility.
I love that. And I think I remember a different mikvah attendant once shared with us that the way she responds is that she'll comment on it. She's saying, I noticed, I don't know if you're aware, you have a bruise on your back, something, to just point it out, but I'm not asking directly. I'm not intruding in a way that may help the person feel unsafe. My job as a facilitator of the process. I'm allowing the space and the comfort that, I'm here for you and I notice and I'm happy to talk if you want to, but I'm not asking you a bunch of questions. I'm not becoming the therapist. And the cards are there if you want, if you want to reach out. I think the cards many women take home and whether or not they disclose at the mikvah, maybe some do, and the mikvah attendant can help facilitate that, that referral. And sometimes not, they can just take that home and have that there. But I think that's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I, if I could springboard off this question a little bit. So, sometimes, noticing bruises or noticing something current on a woman, is one kind of disclosure, but it's also possible as a mikvah attendant that you'll notice behavior, that might seem alarming to you. And you really, so you really want to be sensitive to that also. I'll just share like a couple of examples that come to mind that students have shared over the years. It's interesting, we're talking about kind of slowing down, right? And allowing women space. Sometimes a woman, especially if she feels vulnerable, if she feels uncomfortable, if she doesn't feel safe when she's undressed even by herself, if the whole, right? She might want to get in, get out. She might want to dip as quickly as possible. And I know, students have shared with me that mikvah attendants have said, like, you're a Kallah, take your time, you can daven. And they found that painful, right? Now, I'm like, it's almost like, you can't get it right. So I shouldn't rush, so I shouldn't think, but like as Lisa said, kind of like you pull back a little bit and you, and sometimes, the best thing you can do is not to comment. This isn't our topic today, but this also comes up when, there's a woman who struggles, let's say, with infertility, right? You might know her from the neighborhood, and you might assume that she's going to spend her time really connecting, but going to the mikvah again is so painful for her. She wants to make this as quick as possible, as fast as possible, right? Because being there is so painful to her. So sometimes you might notice what appears to be indifference or what appears to be, not really cherishing the mitzvah. And we should really be down the kapsulas about where that's coming from. Sometimes also, a woman might have a specific psak related to her scenario. So some examples that come to mind are that she does not shower at the mikvah. So she's not coming into the mikvah wet the way we might, we assume that she would. And you might think, like, what do you mean? If a woman prepares at home, when she comes to the mikvah, she needs to rinse off. But for whatever reason, there's, we're not getting into the halachic. She has been told that she does not have to do this. This is not only related to abuse. Sometimes this can be related to anxiety, OCD. It can be very challenging for a woman to even go to the mikveh at all. Having to step into another shower is not happening, right? And I know students who, that's been commented on, which Rav gave you that psak. Another example that comes to mind is, I didn't mention this in our teaching, but I taught a student who had experienced actually physical abuse in her childhood. There was a specific piece of jewelry that she always wore. not connected to this child, but happens to be. This was her experience. And when I was teaching her about mikvah and about chatzitza, I taught her that something small, even if you want it on your body, if it's removable, we remove it for tevilah. And she immediately said, I'm not taking this off. I wear it all the time. I'm not taking it off. Right. And, Baruch Hashem, at that point, I had a little bit of experience. And first of all, I said, don't worry. Right. First, we come, it's okay. This is clearly such an important piece of jewelry to you. We can always ask. It's possible if you never take it off that it's not even a chatzitza, but let's ask. And as soon as I said that, by the way, her shoulders dropped and she calmed down. And I'm so grateful that I didn't think, either think to myself or say, women for thousands of years have taken off their jewelry and you are a link in the chain. And how could you not, right, cherish this, right, to tone it down. But this same student later shared with me that she tried her best to take it off, but she had a psak from her Rav that if she was ever at the mikvah and feeling like she just could not part with it, that she should keep it on and she should just make sure that, whether it's a ring, she turns the ring or whatever, that the water can kind of get under it briefly. And the mikvah attendant gave her a very hard time. Are you sure that's your psak? I never heard a psak like that. Right? So I think that the facilitator is the perfect word, because at the end of the day, the woman's tevilah is not your responsibility, right? Our responsibility, and I do sometimes serve as a mikvah attendant also, our responsibility is to make sure that, assuming she has done her chafifa the way she is supposed to, right? She is completely immersed in one total immersion under the water. And we are there to, right, to inform her that has happened. Right.
And that's it. Right.
That's it. That's all I'm going to say.
No, I'm saying that's it.
Yeah.
The whole job of the mikvah lady is to witness that the whole body is immersed. And that's it. It's not to ask questions. It's not to enforce halacha. It's not to make sure that the chafifa is done according to her terms. It's not to ask where the psak came from. It's to facilitate. I mean, that's been in all the mikvah training that I've had over the years, which has been expensive.
And I will say also, sorry, Elisa, that if you're unsure of a psak, let's say you as a mikvah attendant, you have to, operate under the rabbinic guidance of your mikvah. Okay, so if you're unsure, let's say you're in the prep room and this girl tells you, I'm not gonna, and that seems troubling to you, strange to you, whatever. Just excuse yourself for a moment and go call the Rav of the mikveh and say, I'm in this situation. Something seems a little bit off, but is it possible that a woman would, let's say if you need that reassurance for yourself for whatever reason, you can go seek it elsewhere. You don't need to put the onus on this woman who is likely in a pretty sensitive situation. And if you have a knowledgeable, informed Rav, he will say, look, I don't know what this woman's situation is, but is it ever possible that a tevilah could be kosher with this? Yes, it's right. Whatever reassure, or if the Rav tells you it's not your responsibility, it's not your thing, right? This is another thing. I know this is not the topic at all, but I do think that if mikvahs have specific policies about what they do or don't let, let's say certain mikvahs do not allow gel manicures, acrylic nails, etc. I beg mikvahs, please make this information as public as possible, right? So that we don't end up in a situation where a woman is there and now we're in a really tough spot because she thought she was going to be able to go here and now she can't, and maybe she's visiting from out of town. And I think even, sometimes mikvahs do have some flexibility around that, but just over, the overarching message is that if you personally need reassurance as a mikvah attendant, right, that's totally understandable, but that reassurance does not need to come from the vulnerable woman standing in front of you. It can come from somewhere else. And it's totally okay to say, you just excuse me for 1 second, or I'm sorry, whatever it is. Pretend you have a wire in your ear and they're paging you from Mars, whatever, right? Excuse yourself and you can come back. And if you personally are not comfortable and it's a large enough mikvah, another attendant can take over, right? But yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, I see Shani, another one of our project managers and a colleague.
Can I ask a question?
Hang on 1 second. Who's speaking? We will get to you right after this.
Okay.
Mikvah, did you say I can go? Okay.
Let's go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thanks. First of all, Chevy and Elisa, thank you so much for everything you do and for this amazing presentation. I'm sorry that I want to ask a question, but because of Ricky, who's amazing, I might have needed to go out and missed it. So if you address this already, I'll listen on the video. So please move on from me. But I have had a number of times Kallah, who I happen to know has experienced abuse, sometimes sexual, sometimes otherwise. And often they're girls from the community, and I am trying to make safe spaces and, do all as we know. And I see that they're really just they don't want me to be part of that. And they want to just, there's a big part of them that just wants to be regular and a regular Kallah. And I, specifically this one Kallah that I just had was very concerned because of the way I knew her abuse was going to, but she wouldn't address it with me. And I addressed it subtly without her knowledge, but that was in a limited way. What do you say about that? I mean, I did hook her up with other people, but I went through all 10 Kallah classes without covering the topic. So I just want to hear your opinion about that. Did you address that already?
Not specifically. Yeah, I've been there. It's really hard. It really, really is hard. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, that I should have mentioned this, but as much as I do teach a fair number of these Kallahs, that not in any official capacity, because if you're the Kallah teacher who teaches the girls who have trauma, then first of all, you're personally gonna be overwhelmed. You won't have the capacity, right? You have to kind of keep it balanced. And also nobody's going to come to you. Who wants to go to the Kallah teacher who teaches we're not there yet. We're making progress, but we're not there yet. So certainly that has happened. And similarly, people, I've been told by her Rav, by her mother, by whatever, and she is not bringing it up. So I want to divide this into two potential categories. One is that she knows that and the other is she doesn't know that okay? So if she knows that but you don't, but she's not bringing it up with you, right? But she knows that so you have a little more leeway, right? Because you can make statements without asking anything of her. Best case scenario in this situation. If she does not know that and even more than that, she's convinced that you don't know, this is going to be a little... Right. This is going to be more of an emotional twister, and it is a lot more delicate, but I would still, be careful in the language that I use. And I would still be, really gentle and really thorough. And I would teach her the way I teach a Kallah who I know. I just will not expect any reaction from her. And because this is another thing, because she's never had Kallah classes before, she doesn't know if this is how you always teach or if this is how you're teaching her specifically. Mm-hmm. Doesn't know, right? So this can just be the way you always teach, right? She has nothing to compare it to. So I know we have something to compare it to. So we're nervous, does she, we're sensitive to that. But I think we have to remember that to her, this is Kallah classes, and this can just be how you always do it. And you can even throw in, things like, I always want my Kallahs to know, or I always make sure to emphasize, or it's important to me that Kallahs remember, whatever it is. So you're kind of extra throwing it in, implying that this is how you always teach. That's what I would do. Mm-hmm. Also, hi, Shani.
Hi, Sevi. Thank you so much. I'm sorry if I could just add one more question. This kind of fantasy that they're attaching to, that they're going to get married and everything's going to be fine. And therefore they're really protective of going backwards. I guess because, we know too much, but is there any value in just like Aliza's presentation about coming out of the water and leaving everything behind, and the machar, and can I join her in that fantasy? Is there value in doing that? And can I give myself permission to let go of my, hyper vigilant, looking for ways to protect her? Can you address that for a minute? I'm just muting myself because of
I'll address that for a minute, and then Chevy can too. But I would say, yeah, join her in that, but let her know that, okay, the mikvah is very nice. You can let go of yesterday and step into a new tomorrow. And sometimes you need more tools for that is our superpower. And this is the place. That's what I was going to bring in. I forgot. So my personal definition of a mitzvah. What is a mitzvah? A commandment, a connecting thing. It is a physical pathway to a spiritual destination. That's what a mitzvah is, a physical pathway to a spiritual destination. So you could teach that here. This is the physical pathway to that spiritual destination. Going to the mikvah is your physical pathway to the spiritual destination of Hitchadshut and making a new start. And we also need other tools in our life. So you want to make new starts. There's so many, we're all doing the best we can with the tools we have. And if where we are right now is not where we want to be, and we have done the best we can with the tools we have, we might need to add another tool. And tools are people or books or TED Talks or shiurim. Like, just add a tool. If you want to create something different, and it's so great that every month you have this opportunity, every day actually, to leave your past behind and start a new tomorrow. So, but if you've done the best you can with the tools you have, feel free to add a new tool. You know, I'm teaching you a toolbox, and there's an unlimited toolbox out there. Like, go get it. So just to let them know that yeah, there's always a way to add new tools.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll add that analogy that I like to use, and sometimes I explain this to students if it's appropriate, is that think of, you know, our trauma as like, you know, a burden that we carry, right? And like anyone who has ever had to carry something, there are more efficient and less efficient ways to do this, right? So I say, like, imagine everything is in a backpack, right? Those of you with like 4-year-olds have probably seen your 4-year-old trying to put on their backpack like the front way, right? And it looks really fun and they're all excited to do it. But after a few minutes, it's like very unwieldy and they can't really get from point A to point B, and it just constantly getting in the way, and they're bumping into things. They have no sense of, like, you know, how much space they take up in their environment, right? And then you show them, like, oh no, if you take this and you turn it around and you wear it on your back, right? It's a lot more portable. You know, it's, you can kind of, you can navigate a lot of different situations, right? Without, because sometimes we have to put this down. Sometimes we can't even put it down, and it's not that we have to put it down, but we do have to learn how to carry it in a more efficient way so that we're not constantly bumping into things, right? So I think that you can certainly, you know, emotionally kind of join her in that place of, like, it's gonna be great. And like Aliza said, we have so many tools. I have full confidence in you and your ability to navigate this. And at the same time, you know, you can share with her. And if that ever feels less true to you, right, let's consider how we're carrying this. Maybe things have shifted and we have to shift them. We have to shift them back.
Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, and thank you, Shani, for that great question. I know we're short on time. I want Coley to quickly squeeze your chance in. You can feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, I just have a very quick question. I work in the Mikvah Shabbos Friday nights, and I find many new Kallahs coming into the Mikvah, and they're so unclear what to do. And I tell them Friday night, of course, it's much easier. And I know when they go in, you know, they're putting their hands over their body, covering themselves up. And I know myself, my Kallah teacher never taught me that I don't have to face the mikvah lady. I'm allowed to face the wall. And I think it is so important for Kallah teachers today to stress to the girls, you don't have to face the mikvah lady. I remember being so embarrassed, of course, because I was heavy also at that time. It used to kill me to go to the mikvah because of my embarrassment. Is it okay, or should I not bother if a girl is facing me and covering herself and I see she's like embarrassed? Is it okay that we say, you know, you're allowed to face the wall, you don't have to look at me?
Can I answer this, Aliza? And then you'll add? Okay, so I actually not too long ago had this, that I sometimes, I'm the Friday night attendant in my neighborhood. I try not to be because it makes people uncomfortable, you know, when it's me, but sometimes it happens. I'm like the third backup, and that's what it is. And this happened one time that I was taking a friend of mine, right? And she was facing me, and I was like, oh no, what do I do? Do I tell her? Do I not tell her? She's in the water. I don't want to make her uncomfortable now. And I was back and forth and coming up. And as we were walking out together, so we were side by side, she was not facing me anymore. We were walking out. I said, you know, for your own comfort, you can face whichever direction you want in the mikvah, right? And she grabs onto my arm and she goes, are you serious? You kidding me right now? She goes, you changed my life. I'm like, happy to change your life, right? But I do think that, yes, you can say something. I would wait for the right opportunity. I would, you know, try and be as discreet as possible while she's in the water. If you can do that, let's say either while you're holding up the towel as she's walking up, not when she has to make eye contact with you, or if you walk out together or whatever it might be, right, side by side. And I would emphasize that it's for her comfort and not yours. Meaning she shouldn't feel like you're telling her she should turn a different direction because it makes you uncomfortable to see her. For her comfort, right? You can face any direction you want for your comfort, as long as I can see the surface of the water, which I can, any direction, you can do whatever feels best to you. So that's the only point that I would like emphasize, that you're not telling her to turn around because it makes you uncomfortable, but it's for her comfort. That makes sense?
Can I say that automatically while they're walking down the steps into the mikveh? It's okay if you're comfortable.
Sure.
And it's happened. And they told me, wow, I never knew that.
Right.
And I'm surprised that Kallah teachers don't tell the girls that today. No one told that to me.
Yeah. I actually remember the first time I went to the mikvah. I'm from Montreal, and the mikvah attendant was, I don't think she's alive anymore, this old Russian woman. And when I went into the water as a Kallah, she goes, "Oh, honey, turn around for you, turn around," you know. And I was forever grateful to her, you know, that was my first. It was so sweet, and you know, the fact that she was like so old, it really helped. But no, certainly it's something that I teach my Kallahs, and all Kallah teachers should mention. And I think, yes, if you can mention something, let's say as you're kind of walking her through what the process is, knock when you're ready or whatever, and you can call through the door. By the way, when you're in the water, face any direction you want, whatever's comfortable for you, right? So you can find that that time where if she does feel a little taken aback by that, you don't have to witness her reaction. Yeah.
And it's for any woman, not even for a Kallah.
I always tell the brachas the other way. Like if most mikvahs that have a bracha on the wall, it's facing the other way. Right. You go, oh, I never knew it was there.
And also, some of them don't do the tefillos. And I was listening to what you said. Maybe they want to get out. Maybe we're not judging them with kaf sechus, but I find very few women and girls take the time to daven in the mikvah. Doesn't matter. Very quick. And it's like, to me, it's amazing how they don't take that opportunity.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know the opportunity. I think it's because a lot of people actually don't know. You know, I remember confiding in somebody once as a younger wife, you know, just a few years in, and I said, like, there's so much to daven for. Like, I can't, like, till I say everybody's names, I'm worried. Like the mikvah lady is there waiting for me. I don't know what to do. So I just kind of like, I told her, I make batches. Like these guys need a refuah shleima, these guys need a shidduch, these guys need a baby, these guys need parnas, and I just try to visualize them and quick get out. So I won't look. And this person said, that's why we daven for Mashiach. She said, just one tefillah for Mashiach covers all of that. And I was like, that's a huge relief. But it really depends on your own relationship with yourself, with your timing, with your mikvah lady, with the space that's there, how much tefillah you want to put in, or even if you could put that in. So that's what I mean. But we could create that space in which another flourishes, letting them know they have the time, letting them know they could face any direction, letting them know we'll even step out and wait if they want some time. We can tell them,
should we tell them when they go
come back in 5 minutes?
Should we tell them when they go down it's okay? Like, should we make them aware? Like, you may not know, but it's okay. You could take time to daven, or should we just let them do what they want to do? Sometimes I want to tell them it's okay, daven.
I would probably say something broader, like, you know, take as much time as you need. Don't worry about me. But I don't know that I would like specifically say, you know, you can or should daven. Also, some women, you know, it's interesting, like they don't feel comfortable for whatever reason davening in the mikvah, but they daven a lot before and after. So we actually might not witness, you know, what's happening. That's piece number one. And piece number two is I think that, you know, I always encourage my Kallahs to develop their own personal relationship with mikvah, which takes time. So I think it is common to sometimes see newlyweds, you know, the same way, you know, like I was recently in Eretz Yisrael with my children, and I see like my 7-year-old like shuckling at you know, at the kaisel, right? And like, doesn't really know what he's doing, but that's what everybody else around him is. He has this like intensity, right? And it's so sweet, but also you know that it's not really anchored in a. I mean, I'm not here to minimize his relationship with Hakadosh Baruch Hu, but I also know that his relationship with this place will grow and evolve, right? So sometimes with newlyweds, especially, you'll kind of see them go through the motions, and then they'll pull back, and then they'll reconnect. And then maybe something more difficult will happen. It gets harder, but then they really kind of, you know, step into it more, and their relationship with mikvah is going to fluctuate the same way their relationship with any mitzvah will fluctuate, right? So I think sometimes it is common with newlyweds to see a little bit less of that. And like Elisa said, many of them truly don't know, and there can be opportunities for them to learn. But with, you know, not like with any pressure, you know, it's not, we didn't really talk about broadly trauma, but many women do have, you know, a certain amount of spiritual, religious trauma, you know, around their learning and the way certain things have been taught to them. So, you know, it could be, it's nothing, you know, so obvious, but it just requires them to kind of be a little more distant at this stage of the game in their mitzvah practice.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for that question. And that really brings us to, oh, we have time.
Can I make a comment on her question about the mikvah? Can I just make a comment about Goldie's question? I think it also depends on the mikvah. I work in the mikvah also. In the summer, it's really crowded. If you have 4 or 5 people in a waiting room, I think the person has to also be considerate of her davening versus taking someone else's time. 11:30 at night, don't sit there davening for a half hour. You know, I think maybe they should just ask the mikvah lady, could I have a few minutes now? Usually we'll say yes, but there are times we'll say, whatever, Motzei Yom Kippur, Motzei Tisha B'Av, we're backed up. You know, you're taking 5 minutes and you're causing someone else a wait. I think it's a balancing act a little bit. And I think the Kallah, or the woman, not necessarily the Kallah, should also say, hey, could I have a few minutes now?
Right. Yeah. I like to remind my Kallahs that mikvah attendants are human.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't Nordstrom. You're not entitled to like 5-star customer service. You know, they really try their
best. You get 5-star customer service, but we expect a little back too.
Sure, 100%. And I do like to point out, you know, I live in Muncie. We get a lot of people on their way to the mountains also. And, you know, so Thursday night in the summer can be really bad here in Muncie, you know,
Right.
and you do need to be cognizant of that. And I think that there are ways, you know, to gently say, like, for example, you know, you can say to a woman as you take her in, you know, I don't want to rush you. I just, you know, it is, you know, whatever time, and there are a few other women. So, you know, we would so appreciate if you could be mindful of the time, but of course, you know, have the experience that
Right.
you want, you know,
Right.
and I think that there are ways to gently say that and remind her, you know, where I also find this happens sometimes, you know, second night of Yantif, women at the mikvah, right? So I actually had this, not Shavuos actually, that there was a, you know, it was one Shavuos night, it was the second night of a Yantif, and this woman had asked if she could come pretty late, meaning she had to wait for her husband to walk home from shul, and then she had to walk, right? So by the time I was meeting her at the mikvah, it was pretty, like quite some time after marriage. And then she got to the mikvah, and I waited for her for like another 20 minutes. And I'm thinking to myself, the second night of Yantif, like, what are you doing already? There's like almost nothing to do. And also, why couldn't you take the 20 minutes that you were waiting for your husband? So it was, again, it was a little bit frustrating for me. I genuinely think that she did not consider that I have my own family waiting at home, you know, or anything like that. I think that there really is a balancing act.
Right.
I think sometimes women are, you know, I kind of got a certain like anxiety vibe from her also. I didn't want to pressure her. I also think that in general, the pressuring, you know, if you ever notice, like when you're trying to rush your children along, or if you just give them time, it actually sometimes takes less time when you don't rush them. I don't know how that works. Like, it's like a weird childhood math, right? But sometimes like we know as mikvah attendants that there are so many other things that we have to do and other things we have to get to. So we feel that pressure. You know, we want that woman to be mindful, but we don't necessarily want her to feel the pressure in a way that could compromise her experience, right? So I think that there definitely are ways gently to say, like, we would so appreciate, you know, your consideration, and of course, like, please take the time you need,
Right.
something like that. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Am I allowed to make a closing comment about something to do with the mikvah, because it just like popped into my head, and this specifically relates to abuse, just specifically? A lot of times I will encourage my Kallahs to ask for what they need in the mikvah. Okay, so I'll tell them, if you know that you specifically need something, ask for it, you know, on your way to the mikvah, when the attendant comes into the room to get you, whatever it is. So I don't think I'm the only Kallah teacher who does this. So if you are a mikvah attendant and a woman in the mikvah is making a specific request of you, please honor it. Something along the lines of, please turn around versus holding up the towel. If a woman feels more comfortable with that, please honor that. You know, a woman told me that she asked the mikvah attendant to please turn around and wait until she handed her the towel. The mikvah attendant was like, well, how am I going to know if you hand me the towel, if my back is touching? Like, if a woman is asking you for something, there generally is a reason. She's not, or she's high maintenance and, and she has her own struggles and nebuch on her, whatever it is, right? But either way, we don't really need to give that pushback. Obviously, sometimes there's a liability concern. I've had women who say, can you please wait for me to get into the water before you come into the room? Some mikvah attendants will say, the mikvah doesn't let me do that. I have to be in the room. But again, I still think that there are ways around it. You can stand just outside the door with the door slightly open so that you're kind of, right, speak to your mikvah director. But I think that if a woman is making a specific request about her mikvah experience, it's almost always going to be more than just, this is my preference. And as much as we can honor it, we can really ensure that she has a safe mikvah experience.
Well said. Thank you. That's a perfect note to end on and wrap up. But I really want to say thank you so much to Aliza, thank you so much to Chevy, and thank you so much to the rest of you, everybody who really took the time to show up today, and for all the women who are lucky enough to be in contact with you. We so appreciate your time. We so appreciate everything that was shared now. And I just want you both to know that I've been getting so many messages in the chat. I'm so sorry I have to run off, but please tell the presenter this was a phenomenal training. It was a pleasure to be a part of this. I wish I could have stayed longer. So all of that feedback, I just wanted to pass that on.
Thank you.
To mention to everybody here that we'll be working on the recording. I hope to have it uploaded within 24 to 48 hours, or however quickly we can get that done. And we'll be sending out a survey as soon as that's ready, just to ask feedback about the event, things that we can do on our end to improve. And there'll also be a question where you can sign up to register for a link to a time-limited access to the recording. So please feel free to do that. I know we had many people that couldn't attend at this timing, but are begging and keep sending me messages, when can I get the recording? So we're going to get that out to you as soon as we can. And I want to say thank you again to everybody for being here today. We really appreciate your time, and this was an amazing experience. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the
organizing it.
opportunity.